The whip cracked like thunder across the Colorado sky, but it never touched her skin. Clara Whitfield stood tied to the post in her bloodied wedding dress, condemned for refusing a monster's hand. Then a stranger stepped between her and death, a cowboy with ice in his eyes and fire in his heart. He caught the lash with his bare hand and spoke words that would change everything. "She's already taken." This is their story. Stay with me until the end, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The sun hung low over Clearwater, Colorado, painting the dusty main street in shades of copper and blood. It was the kind of evening that should have been peaceful, the kind where families gathered on porches and children chased fireflies through the dying light. But there was nothing peaceful about this day, nothing gentle about the crowd that had gathered in the town square, their faces drawn with shame and fear, their eyes fixed on the horror unfolding before them. Clara Whitfield stood at the center of it all, her wrists bound to the weathered whipping post that had seen too much cruelty in its years. Her wedding dress, once white as fresh snow, now torn and stained with dirt and blood, hung from her shoulders like a shroud. The delicate lace her mother had spent months crafting was shredded at the hem, dragging through the Colorado dust. Her dark hair had come loose from its careful braiding, falling wild around her face, and her green eyes, those defiant, burning eyes, stared straight ahead, refusing to give her tormentors the satisfaction of seeing her break. She was 23 years old. She should have been celebrating her wedding day. Instead, she was about to be whipped like a criminal in front of the entire town. The crowd had formed a loose circle around the post, keeping a safe distance as if the violence about to occur might somehow spread to them if they stood too close. There were perhaps 60 people gathered, merchants and farmers, wives clutching their children close, old men who had seen the frontier at its worst and thought those days were behind them. But no one moved to help her. No one dared, because Silas Garrison stood at the edge of that circle, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the square. And when Silas Garrison wanted something, even the law looked the other way. He was a man built like a bull, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with hands that looked like they could crush stones. At 56, his hair had gone iron gray, but his face remained hard and unlined, carved from the same unforgiving stone as the mountains that surrounded Clearwater. He wore a black suit that must have cost more than most families earned in a year, and his boots, polished to a mirror shine, had probably never touched a stirrup. Silas Garrison didn't ride horses anymore. He owned half the territory and had other men do his riding for him. His eyes were the color of dirty ice, and right now they were fixed on Clara with the kind of hunger that made decent people look away. "I gave you every opportunity, girl," Silas said, his voice carrying easily across the silent square. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, deep and rough as gravel underfoot. "Every goddamn opportunity to do this the civilized way. I offered you a proper wedding, a contract that would have saved your family's worthless land. I even offered to let you keep that pathetic garden your mother loved so much." Clara's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Couldn't respond. The gag in her mouth prevented that. A crude piece of cloth tied so tight it cut into the corners of her lips. They'd gagged her after she'd cursed Silas in front of the entire congregation, right there in the church, with the preacher stammering and the guests gasping. She'd told him exactly what he could do with his proposal, using language that would have made a saloon girl blush. It had been worth it. Even now, tied and helpless, she didn't regret those words. "You embarrassed me," Silas continued, taking a step closer. The crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. "In my own town, in front of people I do business with. You made me look like a fool, Clara Whitfield, and that's something I just can't abide." His foreman, a wiry man named Dutch Crenshaw, stood beside the whipping post with the coiled leather in his hands. Dutch was loyal to Silas the way a dog was loyal to the hand that fed it, completely and without question. He'd done this before, Clara knew. Whipped men who'd crossed Silas, whipped workers who'd tried to organize for better wages, whipped anyone his boss pointed at. His eyes were empty as he tested the whip's weight, letting it uncoil slightly to check the length. The leather was old and stained dark with use. "You know the law in these territories, don't you?" Silas asked, addressing the crowd now as much as Clara. A woman who breaks a binding contract, especially one made before witnesses, she's subject to public punishment. It's right there in the Territorial Code, Section 42, subsection 8. She signed papers agreeing to marry me. Her father signed those same papers before he died. The land deed was the dowry, all legal and proper. That's a damned lie. The shout came from somewhere in the crowd. Old Marcus Webb, who'd known Clara's father, but his voice cracked with age and fear, and when Silas's cold eyes found him, Marcus fell silent, shrinking back into the mass of bodies. Her father was drunk when he signed, someone else muttered, but too quiet for Silas to identify the speaker. Silas smiled, though there was no warmth in it. The law don't care about the circumstances of signing, only that it was done. And Clara here, she had the chance to honor that contract. Hell, I gave her 3 months to come around, to see reason. Instead, she spat in my face in front of God and everybody. He moved closer to Clara now, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, and the expensive cologne that couldn't quite cover the scent of his sweat. When he reached out to touch her face, she jerked her head away violently, earning a chuckle from him. "Still got fire," he said appreciatively. "I like that. Truth be told, I still want you, Clara, even after all this. You give me a son, and I'll forget this whole unfortunate incident. We'll start fresh. You'll want for nothing." The muffled sound Clara made through the gag was clearly a refusal, crude and absolute. Silas's smile faded. He stepped back, brushing imaginary dust from his expensive suit. "Suit yourself. Dutch, you know what to do. 10 lashes ought to teach her some humility. And mind you do it proper. I want marks that'll remind her who runs this town every time she looks in a mirror." Dutch nodded once, mechanically. He moved behind Clara, positioning himself for the first strike. The crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath. A woman near the front, Mrs. Patterson from the general store, turned her face away, pulling her daughter close. Men removed their hats, as if preparing for a funeral. Clara closed her eyes. She'd made her choice. She'd rather die with her dignity than live as Silas Garrison's property. Her mother hadn't raised a coward, and her father, drunk as he'd been, weak as he'd become before the fever took him, he wouldn't have wanted this for her. The land could burn, the farm could crumble to dust. Some things mattered more. Dutch raised the whip high, letting it coil back for maximum force. The leather caught the dying sunlight, seeming to glow red for just an instant. Clara braced herself, every muscle in her body tensing for the pain she knew was coming. The whip cracked through the air like a rifle shot, but the scream that followed wasn't Clara's. It was Dutch's. The crowd gasped as one, a collective intake of breath that sounded like wind rushing through a canyon. Clara's eyes snapped open and she saw something she couldn't quite process at first. Dutch stumbling backward, the whip no longer in his hands, blood streaming from a gash across his knuckles. And standing between her and her tormentor, impossibly, was a stranger. He'd appeared as if from nowhere, materializing in that space between the whip's arc and Clara's back. He was tall, taller than Silas, which was saying something, and lean in the way men got when they spent their lives in the saddle with more miles than meals. His clothes were trail-worn, dusty pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better years. A hat with a wide brim cast his face in shadow, but Clara could see his jaw, square and set with the kind of determination that came from facing down death more than once. And in his hand, caught and held like a captured snake, was the whip. He'd caught it mid-strike, caught it bare-handed, letting the leather wrap around his forearm, taking the full force of the blow himself. Blood seeped through his sleeve where the whip had bitten flesh, but his grip never wavered. "I believe," the stranger said, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent square with perfect clarity, "you've made a mistake." The accent was frontier American but refined, educated. Not a drifter's drawl, but not city soft either. Something in between. Like a man who'd read books but lived hard. Silas recovered from his shock first. "Who the hell are you? Dutch, get that whip back and—" "Touch her again," the stranger interrupted, his tone still calm, almost conversational. "And I'll wrap this leather around your neck instead of my arm." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Dutch, nursing his bleeding hand, looked to Silas uncertainly. The crowd pressed closer, murmuring now, confusion and curiosity overcoming fear. The stranger turned slightly, and for the first time, Clara saw his face fully. He was younger than she'd expected from his bearing, maybe 30, with features that were more angular than handsome, weathered by sun and wind. But his eyes were the color of winter sky, pale blue and absolutely steady. They were the eyes of a man who'd seen the worst the world could offer and hadn't looked away. Those eyes found hers, held them for just a moment, and something passed between them, some wordless understanding or promise. Then he turned back to Silas. "The lady," he said, with emphasis on the word that made it clear what he thought of men who'd harm women, "is already spoken for." Silas's face darkened to the color of old blood. "The hell she is. She's bound by contract to me, signed and witnessed. You don't know what you're—" "I know exactly what I'm walking into," the stranger said. He released the whip, letting it fall to the dust, and from inside his vest he pulled out a folded paper. "And I know the law. Territorial Code, Section 42, Subsection 12. A prior claim, when properly documented and filed, supersedes any subsequent contract, especially when that subsequent contract was signed under duress by a man not of sound mind." He held up the paper so the crowd could see the official seal at the bottom. Clara couldn't make out the details from where she stood, but she saw Silas's expression change, saw uncertainty flicker across his face for the first time. "That's impossible," Silas said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Her father signed the Whitfield farm over to me 6 years ago," the stranger said calmly, "when he still had his wits about him, before the drink took him. It's all legal and recorded in Denver. The land, the house, the livestock, and—" He paused, his eyes never leaving Silas's face. "His daughter's hand in marriage, should she agree when she came of age." The lie was perfect. Absolutely, completely perfect. Claire's mind reeled, trying to understand what was happening. She'd never seen this man before in her life. Her father had never mentioned selling the farm to anyone, but the stranger spoke with such confidence, such authority, that even she almost believed it. "She came of age 3 years ago," the stranger continued. "We've been corresponding by letter ever since, making arrangements. I came to Clearwater to finally claim what's mine, my land and my bride. And I find her tied to a post like a criminal, about to be brutalized by a man with a fake contract and a false claim." "That's a goddamn lie," Silas roared, finally finding his voice. "I've seen every land deed in this county. There's no such—" "Because it was filed in Denver, not here. Your influence doesn't reach that far, Garrison. Not yet, anyway." The stranger's smile was thin and sharp. "You can send a wire to verify if you'd like. The clerk's office will confirm every word, though I suspect by the time you get a response, your 30-day window to contest will have expired." It was a bluff. It had to be. But it was delivered with such perfect conviction that the crowd was already shifting, already believing. Clara could see it in their faces. The hope that someone had finally stood up to Silas Garrison, the relief that they might not have to witness something that would haunt them. Silas's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he turned to Dutch. "Check his papers. Tear them up if you have to, but—" The stranger's hand moved to his hip, and suddenly there was a gun in his palm, drawn so fast that Clara barely saw the movement. It was a Colt Peacemaker, well-maintained and clearly not just for show. He didn't point it at anyone, just held it loose and ready. "I wouldn't recommend that," he said mildly. "This is a legal matter now, not a personal one. You push it further, and you're the one breaking the law, not me." The standoff stretched out, tense and fragile. Silas's face was purple with rage, but Clara could see him calculating, weighing his options. He was a businessman first, always had been. Reputation mattered, but profit mattered more, and getting into a gunfight over a woman, especially when there were witnesses and legal documents involved, that was bad for business. "This isn't over," Silas said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "Those papers, I'll have them examined by every lawyer from here to Santa Fe. If there's a single thing wrong with them, if this is fraud, then you'll have legal recourse," the stranger agreed pleasantly. "That's how civilization works, Garrison. You should try it sometime instead of whipping women in the street." The crowd murmured at that, and Clara saw something shift in Silas's eyes. The realization that this had damaged him, that his authority in Clearwater had just taken a blow it might not recover from. "Dutch," Silas snapped. "We're leaving. But you," he pointed at the stranger, "you'd better watch your back. Accidents happen on the frontier. Men disappear." "They do indeed," the stranger agreed, his voice still calm. "Usually men who make threats, they can't back up." Silas turned on his heel and stalked away, Dutch and his other men falling in behind him. The crowd parted quickly, not wanting to be associated with his retreat. Within moments, the square was clearing, people drifting away in twos and threes, whispering excitedly about what they'd just witnessed. The stranger waited until Silas was out of sight before holstering his gun. Then he turned to Clara, and his expression softened slightly. "I'm going to remove that gag now," he said quietly. "Try not to scream. We've had enough drama for one evening." He moved behind the post and Clara felt his hands, gentle despite their roughness, working at the knot. The gag came free, and she gasped, working her jaw to ease the ache. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice hoarse. "Luke Carver," he said, moving to untie her wrists. "And before you ask, no, your father didn't sign anything over to me. Those papers are forgeries, good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. I figure we've got maybe a week before Garrison's lawyers prove it." Clara's wrists came free, and she stumbled forward, her legs weak from standing so long. Luke caught her elbow, steadying her. "Then why?" she asked, confusion and gratitude warring in her chest. "Why would you risk yourself for a stranger? If those papers are fake, Silas will—" "Kill me?" Luke finished. "Maybe. Probably. But I've been on borrowed time for a while now anyway, and I couldn't—" He paused, something dark passing across his face. "I couldn't watch another innocent person suffer at the hands of a powerful man. Not again. Not when I could stop it." There was a story there, Clara realized. Pain buried deep, old wounds that hadn't healed. But before she could ask, Luke was already moving, scanning the square. "We need to leave," he said. "Now, before Garrison has time to think this through and come back with more men. Can you ride?" Yes, but I don't have—" "There's a horse tied behind the general store. Black mare, white star on her forehead. She's gentle. Can you make it there without falling?" Clara nodded, though truthfully she wasn't sure. Her whole body was shaking with reaction, fear, relief, confusion, all mixing together until she felt dizzy. Luke must have seen it in her face because he swore quietly and in one smooth motion swept her up into his arms. Clara let out a small sound of surprise, but didn't protest. She didn't have the strength. "Where are we going?" she asked as he carried her quickly through the darkening streets, avoiding the main roads. "My place," Luke said. "About 10 miles north, up in the foothills. It's not much, but it's defensible, and Garrison doesn't know about it yet. You'll be safe there, at least for a while." "And then what?" Luke's jaw tightened. "Then we figure out how to turn a lie into the truth. Or we run. Either way, we've got some decisions to make." They reached the horse, exactly as he'd described, and Luke set Clara down gently before untying the reins. The mare nickered softly, and Luke murmured something soothing to her before turning back to Clara. "I know this is all happening too fast," he said. "I know you've got no reason to trust me. But right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and Silas Garrison. So I'm asking you to trust me for just tonight, just until we're somewhere safe. Then you can ask all your questions, and I'll answer every damn one of them. Deal?" Clara looked at him, this stranger who'd appeared like something out of a dime novel, who'd risked his life for someone he'd never met, who'd somehow known exactly what to say and do to stop the unstoppable Silas Garrison. His arm was still bleeding from where the whip had struck, soaking through his sleeve, but he hadn't so much as flinched. "Deal," she whispered. Luke nodded once, then swung up into the saddle with easy grace. He offered his hand down to Clara, and she took it, letting him pull her up behind him. She had to hitch up her ruined wedding dress to sit properly, and she felt absurdly aware of the impropriety of it, riding behind a strange man, her arms wrapped around his waist, in a torn dress that showed her petticoats. But propriety seemed like a small concern when the alternative had been a whipping post and a forced marriage to a monster. "Hold tight," Luke said, and then they were moving, the mare's hooves kicking up dust as they left Clearwater behind. Clara pressed her face against Luke's back, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Behind them, the town grew smaller, its lights beginning to flicker on against the gathering darkness. Somewhere back there, Silas Garrison was planning his next move, gathering his forces, preparing to reclaim what he believed was his. But for now, for this moment, Clara was free. She closed her eyes and held on tighter, not knowing what tomorrow would bring, not knowing if this stranger was her salvation or just another danger in a different form. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, it had to be better than what she'd left behind. The mare carried them north, toward the dark line of mountains, toward whatever future waited in those hills. And Clara Whitfield, who hours ago had been a bride condemned, now rode into the unknown with a cowboy who'd caught a whip meant for her back and claimed her as his own, with nothing but a lie and a gun. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of her life. And it was only the beginning. The night air grew colder as they climbed higher into the foothills, the mare picking her way carefully along a narrow trail that Luke seemed to know by heart, even in the darkness. Clara's arms ached from holding on, her body pressed against Luke's back out of necessity rather than choice. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the constant vigilance of a man who expected trouble at every turn. Neither of them had spoken since leaving Clearwater. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unasked questions and the weight of what had just happened. Clara's mind kept replaying the moment the whip had cracked through the air, the impossible speed with which Luke had moved, the cold authority in his voice when he'd faced down Silas Garrison. Who was this man? And more importantly, what did he want from her? The trail wound through stands of ponderosa pine, their scent sharp and clean in the mountain air. Occasionally, Clara caught glimpses of Clearwater far below, its scattered lights looking small and distant, like fallen stars. She wondered if her few friends were talking about what had happened, if Mrs. Patterson was telling her daughter that sometimes God sent angels in unexpected forms, if old Marcus Webb was drinking to the memory of her father and cursing himself for not standing up to Silas. She wondered if Silas was already planning his revenge. "Not much further now," Luke said suddenly, his voice startling her. It was the first either of them had spoken in nearly an hour. "There's a spot up ahead where the trail widens. We'll rest the horse there for a minute." Clara nodded against his back, then realized he couldn't see her. "All right," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. True to his word, the trail soon opened into a small clearing where a stream tumbled down over smooth rocks, catching the moonlight. Luke dismounted first, then reached up to help Clara down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, stiff from riding and weak from the day's trauma. Luke's hand steadied her, strong and sure. "Easy," he said. "Take a minute. Let the blood flow back." He led the mare to the stream, letting her drink while he scanned their surroundings with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to danger. Clara watched him, really looked at him for the first time since he'd appeared in the town square like some kind of avenging spirit. In the moonlight, she could see the blood on his sleeve more clearly, a dark stain spreading from where the whip had wrapped around his arm. "You're hurt," she said, moving toward him. "Let me see." Luke glanced down at his arm as if he'd forgotten about it. "It's nothing. I've had worse." "That's not an answer," Clara said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "You took a blow meant for me. The least I can do is bandage it properly." For a moment, Luke looked like he might argue. Then something in his expression shifted, and he nodded. "There's supplies in the saddlebag. Clean cloth, at least." Clara found the cloth and a small flask of what turned out to be whiskey. She wet a piece of the fabric with water from the stream, then turned to Luke. "I need to see the wound properly. Can you remove your vest and shirt?" Even in the moonlight, she could see the hesitation cross his face. But he complied, shrugging out of the vest and then carefully peeling away the shirt. The fabric stuck where blood had dried, and Clara heard his sharp intake of breath as it pulled free. What she saw made her gasp. The whip had torn a gash across his forearm, deep and ugly, but that wasn't what shocked her. Luke's torso was a map of old violence. Scars crisscrossed his ribs and back, some thin and precise like knife wounds, others puckered and irregular like bullet holes. There was a particularly brutal scar that ran from his left shoulder blade down to his lower back, as if someone had tried to fillet him like a fish. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph," Clara breathed. "What happened to you?" Luke's jaw tightened. Long story, we don't have time for it tonight. But Clara was already working, cleaning the whip wound with gentle efficiency that came from years of tending to her father's injuries. Though his had usually been self-inflicted falls brought on by too much whiskey, this was different. This was violence done by another human being. "This is going to hurt," she warned, uncapping the flask. "They always say that right before—" Luke's words cut off in a hiss as she poured the whiskey over the wound. To his credit, he didn't pull away, just stood rigid while she worked. "You could have died today," Clara said quietly, wrapping the clean cloth around his arm with practiced hands. "That whip could have opened an artery. And even if it hadn't, interfering with Silas Garrison's business, men have been killed for less." "I know." "Then why did you do it?" The question burst from her, all the confusion and fear and gratitude of the past hours compressed into those 5 words. "Why would you risk your life for someone you've never met? Those papers you showed Silas, you said they were forgeries, which means you came to Clearwater knowing you might have to face him down with nothing but a lie. Why?" Luke was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkness beyond the clearing. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. 3 years ago, I was working as a ranch hand down in New Mexico territory. Place called the Broken Spur, owned by a man named Cyrus Kendall, rich as sin and twice as mean. He took a shine to one of the Mexican girls who worked in his kitchen, Rosa. She was maybe 17, pretty thing, scared of her own shadow. Cyrus decided he wanted her, and what Cyrus wanted, he took. Clara's hand stilled on the bandage, but she didn't interrupt. Rosa's brother Miguel, he tried to stop it, stood up to Cyrus right there in the main house, told him to leave his sister alone. I was in the bunkhouse when I heard the commotion. By the time I got there, Luke's voice cracked slightly. Cyrus had his men hold Miguel down while he beat him. Then he had them tie him to the hitching post out front and took a whip to him. Said it was about teaching respect, about knowing your place. "My God," Clara whispered. "I didn't do anything," Luke continued, and the self-loathing in his voice was palpable. "I stood there with all the other hands, and I watched it happen. Told myself it wasn't my business, that getting involved would just get me killed too. Miguel took 20 lashes before he passed out. They left him there all night. He died before sunrise." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the stream and the mare's quiet breathing. Clara finished tying off the bandage, her hands shaking slightly. "Rosa disappeared that same night," Luke said. "Ran off into the desert rather than face what Cyrus had planned for her. They found her body 2 weeks later, about 15 miles from the ranch. Exposure got her. She was still wearing her kitchen apron." "It wasn't your fault," Clara said softly, though she knew the words wouldn't help. "You couldn't have known—" "I could have done something," Luke cut her off, his voice sharp with old anger. "I had a gun, I had a horse. I could have stood with Miguel or helped Rosa run or put a bullet in Cyrus Kendall's black heart while he slept. But I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my fight, that survival meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut." He turned to face her then, and in the moonlight his eyes were hard and bright. "I left the Broken Spur the next day. Couldn't stand to be there. Couldn't look at myself in a mirror without seeing Miguel tied to that post, or Rosa stumbling through the desert until her heart gave out. I swore that if I ever saw something like that again, if I ever had the chance to stand between a bully and an innocent person, I wouldn't hesitate. I wouldn't be a coward twice." Clara understood then. Understood the scars on his body and the deeper ones she couldn't see. Luke Carver was a man trying to outrun his ghosts, carrying guilt that would never fully fade. "So when you saw me tied to that post," she began, "I saw Rosa. I saw Miguel. I saw every person I've failed to protect because I was too concerned with my own skin." Luke pulled his shirt back on carefully, wincing as the fabric touched his bandaged arm. "I know it doesn't make sense, risking my life for a stranger based on forgeries and a fast draw, but sense went out the window the moment I saw Silas Garrison preparing to do to you what Cyrus did to Miguel." Clara felt something shift in her chest, a strange mixture of sorrow for this broken, brave man and gratitude that his demons had driven him to save her. She reached out and touched his hand, the first time she'd initiated contact. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being a better man this time, for not looking away. Luke's fingers curled around hers, warm and calloused. Don't thank me yet. All I've done is buy you time and paint a target on both our backs. Garrison won't let this stand. Once his lawyers prove those papers are fake, and they will, he'll come for both of us. Then what do we do? Luke helped her back onto the mare, then swung up behind her this time, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. The change in position meant Clara could lean back against his chest, could feel the steady beat of his heart against her shoulder blade. We have options, he said as they started moving again, following the trail higher into the mountains. First option, we run. I've got enough saved to get us to California, maybe Oregon. New names, new lives, far enough away that Garrison's reach won't extend. You'd be free of him. But always looking over my shoulder, Clara said, always wondering if he'd found us. True. Second option, we make the lie true. File the real papers, make our arrangement legal and binding. If we're actually married and I actually own your father's land, then Garrison's claim becomes null. He'd have no legal recourse. Clara's breath caught. You'd marry me? For real? It'd be a business arrangement, Luke said quickly. Legal protection for you, nothing more. We could maintain separate lives, separate rooms. After enough time passes and Garrison loses interest, we could annul it quietly. You'd be free to live your life however you choose. There was something in his voice, some careful neutrality that told Clara this suggestion cost him more than he was letting on. She thought about what that would mean, binding herself to another stranger, even one who'd saved her life. Trading one cage for another, even if this one had an open door. And the third option? She asked. Luke was quiet for a moment. The third option is the dangerous one. We stay and fight. We find a way to discredit Garrison, to break his hold on Clearwater. Maybe expose whatever illegal dealings he's involved in. And a man like that is always involved in something illegal. We turn the tables, make him the one who needs to run. That could take months, Clara said. Years even. And like you said, it's dangerous. It is. But it's also the only option that actually solves the problem instead of just running from it. Other women have probably suffered at Garrison's hands. Other families been ruined by his greed. Someone needs to stand against him eventually. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the sway of the horse beneath her, the solid warmth of Luke at her back. 3 options, each with its own risks and costs. Freedom bought with constant fear, protection purchased with a false marriage, or justice sought at the price of danger. I need time to think, she said finally. You'll have it. We've got at least a few days before Garrison makes his move. Use them to decide what you want, Clara. This is your life. Don't let me or Garrison or anyone else make your choices for you. The trail began to level out, and Clara saw lights ahead, a small cabin nestled against the mountainside, smoke rising from its chimney. It was humble, maybe 4 rooms at most, with a small barn off to one side and a corral that held 2 more horses. Home, Luke said, and there was something almost apologetic in his voice. It's not much, but it's mine. Free and clear, no mortgage or claim against it. Bought it with honest money from honest work. You'll be safe here, Clara. I give you my word. He dismounted and helped her down, then led the mare toward the barn. Clara stood in front of the cabin, looking up at the dark mountains that surrounded it. She could still see a faint glow on the horizon where Clearwater lay, could imagine Silas there, plotting and planning. But up here, in this hidden place, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Luke emerged from the barn and walked to the cabin door, producing a key from his pocket. I should warn you, he said, turning back to her. I wasn't expecting company. Place might be a bit rough. I was about to be whipped in the town square, Clara said dryly. I think I can handle a dusty cabin. That earned her a small smile, the first real one she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less haunted. Then he opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The cabin's interior was indeed rough, but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with embers still glowing from a fire Luke must have started before heading into town. There was a simple kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and what looked like a bedroom door on the far wall. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, more books than Clara would have expected. She saw Shakespeare and Dickens, treatises on law and land management, even a few dime novels tucked in between the more serious volumes. You read, she said, surprised. Luke shrugged, moving to stoke the fire back to life. Got to do something with the long winter nights, and I learned young that knowledge is its own kind of weapon. Those law books are what helped me forge the papers I showed Garrison. Had to know exactly what they'd look for, how to make it convincing. Clara moved closer to the shelves, running her fingers along the spines. My mother loved books. She taught me to read when I was 4 years old, used to make up stories about the characters in our favorite novels. My father thought it was foolish, teaching a girl more than basic reading and sums, said it would give me ideas above my station. And did it? Luke asked, bringing the fire to a healthy blaze. Oh yes, Clara said, a sad smile touching her lips. Ideas about choice and freedom, about women who determined their own futures. Ideas that made me refuse Silas Garrison even when it meant losing everything. Luke straightened, studying her in the firelight. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. She died when I was 15. Pneumonia took her over the course of a week. After that, my father just gave up. Started drinking more, caring less. The farm fell apart. The debts piled up. By the time he died last year, there was nothing left but the land itself. And apparently even that wasn't really ours anymore. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She'd thought she'd made peace with her father's weakness, with the way he'd drunk himself to death, and left her with nothing but problems. But standing here in Luke's cabin, safe for the first time in months, the anger bubbled up fresh and hot. He signed that contract with Garrison 3 months before he died, she continued. Came home one night, drunk as always, and told me I was to marry Silas come spring. Said it was all arranged, that Silas would pay off the debts, and I'd want for nothing. When I refused, he hit me. First time he'd ever raised a hand to me. He cried after, apologized, but the damage was done. Then he died, and I thought maybe I could contest the contract, claim it was signed under duress or while he was intoxicated. But Garrison had witnesses, all his men, swearing my father was sober and willing. Paid witnesses, Luke said. Of course. But their word against mine, a young unmarried woman with no money and no family? I never had a chance. Clara turned away from the books, wrapping her arms around herself. I tried to run, twice. First time Garrison's men caught me before I made it 5 miles. Second time I made it all the way to Denver. Thought I'd lost them. Got a job in a boarding house. Started to think maybe I'd escaped. Then one night Dutch showed up at my door with 2 other men. Dragged me back to Clearwater, and Garrison locked me in a room above the saloon for 2 weeks to think about my choices. Luke's hands clenched into fists. He imprisoned you? He called it protective custody, said I was clearly unstable, prone to fits of hysteria, and he was just keeping me safe until the wedding. The whole town knew, but no one did anything. Sheriff Hayes is in Garrison's pocket, and the circuit judge won't be through for another month. I was trapped. How did you get out? Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mrs. Patterson, sweet, timid Mrs. Patterson who looks like she'd faint at the sight of blood. She snuck me a key and a horse, told me to run as far as I could. But I was stupid. Instead of running, I went to the church. Thought maybe I could convince Reverend Thomas to help me, to refuse to perform the ceremony. I was there when Garrison arrived with half the town. He said we were getting married right then, willing or not. That's when I cursed him in front of God and everybody. She could still remember the feeling, the reckless, liberating fury of finally speaking her mind, of putting words to all the rage and fear she'd been swallowing for months. It had felt like flying, right up until Garrison's face had gone purple, and he'd ordered her tied to the whipping post. Mrs. Patterson will be in danger now, Clara realized suddenly. If Garrison finds out she helped me, he won't, Luke said firmly. Far as anyone knows, you escaped on your own and I just happened to show up at the right time. We'll keep it that way. Clara nodded, but worry gnawed at her. Garrison had ways of finding things out, of extracting information from people who thought they could keep secrets. You should rest, Luke said, gesturing to the bedroom door. Take my bed. I'll sleep out here by the fire. I can't take your bed, Clara protested. This is your home. I'll sleep. You'll sleep in a proper bed, Luke interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. After what you've been through today, you deserve at least that much comfort. Besides, I'm used to sleeping rough. A bedroll by the fire is luxury compared to some places I've laid my head. Clara wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was catching up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. Her whole body ached, and the torn wedding dress felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "All right," she conceded, "but tomorrow we'll work out a better arrangement. I won't be a burden to you, Luke Carver. You saved my life, but that doesn't mean I'm going to take advantage of your hospitality." Something flickered in Luke's expression, respect maybe, or recognition. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who needed saving, a victim waiting for a hero." He shook his head slightly. "But you're not that. You're a survivor. You would have found a way out eventually, even if I hadn't shown up." "Maybe," Clara said, "but I'm grateful I didn't have to find out. Good night, Luke, and thank you for everything." She moved toward the bedroom, then paused at the door. "Those three options you mentioned earlier, running, false marriage, or fighting back. You said I should take time to decide, but I think I already know which one I want." Luke looked at her, waiting. "I want to fight," Clara said. "Garrison has hurt too many people, controlled too many lives. Maybe I can't bring down his whole empire, but I can at least try to free myself from it properly. And if that helps others along the way, so much the better." A slow smile spread across Luke's face. "That's going to be dangerous, Clara. You understand that? Garrison won't just roll over. He'll come at us with everything he has." "I know, but I'm tired of being afraid, tired of running, and besides," she matched his smile with one of her own, "I've got a cowboy with a fast draw and a talent for forgery on my side. That's got to count for something." "It's a start," Luke agreed. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll start planning how to take down one of the most powerful men in Colorado territory." Clara entered the bedroom and closed the door behind her. The room was simple: a bed with clean sheets, a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher of water. A window looked out over the dark valley, and she could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She stripped off the ruined wedding dress, leaving it in a heap on the floor. Tomorrow she'd burn it, watch it turn to ash and smoke. Tonight, she just wanted to forget it existed. The water in the pitcher was cold, but Clara didn't care. She washed away the dust and dried blood, the touch of Silas Garrison's hands on her face, the memory of rough rope around her wrists. When she was as clean as she could get without a proper bath, she found a shirt hanging on a peg, one of Luke's by the size of it, and pulled it on. It fell to her knees, and she had to roll the sleeves up several times, but it was clean, and it smelled like wood smoke and leather, and something she couldn't quite name. She climbed into the bed, and despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the impossibility of her situation, she felt safe. The sheets smelled like Luke too, and the pillow was soft beneath her head. Through the door she could hear him moving around the main room, the crackle of the fire, the clink of what might have been a coffee cup. Clara closed her eyes and let herself drift. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears. Garrison wouldn't give up easily, and the forged papers that had saved her today would eventually be exposed as lies. But Luke had given her something precious: time. Time to plan, time to think, time to figure out how to turn the tables on a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. As sleep began to claim her, Clara's last conscious thought was of Luke standing in the town square, catching the whip meant for her back, his eyes cold as winter and his voice steady as stone. "She's already taken," he'd said, "already spoken for." It had been a lie then. But maybe, Clara thought, as darkness took her, it didn't have to stay one. In the main room, Luke sat by the fire with a cup of whiskey, staring into the flames. His arm throbbed where the whip had struck, and his old scars ached the way they always did when weather was changing. But physical pain was nothing new. He'd learned to live with it, to use it as a reminder that he was still alive, still capable of feeling. What he wasn't accustomed to was the protective fury that had consumed him when he'd seen Clara tied to that post. He'd told her about Miguel and Rosa, about the guilt that had driven him to intervene, but he hadn't told her everything. Hadn't told her how his hands had shaken when he'd stepped between her and Dutch's whip, or how close he'd come to putting a bullet in Silas Garrison's head right there in front of the whole town. Luke took a long drink, letting the whiskey burn down his throat. He'd thought he was past this, past caring about anything beyond his own survival, past feeling anything but the dull ache of old regrets. But Clara had changed that in the space of a few hours. Her defiance, her courage, the way she'd stood there waiting for the lash rather than submit to Garrison's will. It had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead. It was dangerous, this feeling. Dangerous for him and potentially fatal for her, because men like Silas Garrison didn't lose gracefully, and when they struck back, they aimed to destroy everything in their path. Luke's forged papers would buy them a week at most. After that, Garrison would come with lawyers and guns, and Luke would have to be ready. Would have to be smart and fast and ruthless in ways he'd tried to leave behind. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkness. Somewhere down there, Garrison was planning. Somewhere, Dutch was nursing his injured hand and dreaming of revenge. Somewhere, the wheels of violence and retribution were already turning. But up here, in this cabin hidden in the mountains, Clara Whitfield was finally sleeping without fear. And Luke Carver, for all his sins and scars, had done that. Had given her one night of peace. It wasn't redemption. Not even close. But it was something. Luke finished his whiskey and set the cup aside. Then he pulled his bedroll closer to the fire, checked that his gun was loaded and within easy reach, and settled in for a long night of watching and waiting. Because morning would come soon enough, bringing with it all the complications they'd deferred in the desperate flight from Clearwater. And Luke had a feeling that the real fight, the one that would determine whether Clara lived free or died trying, was only just beginning. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountains, spilling golden light through the cabin windows and pulling Clara from the first dreamless sleep she'd had in months. For a brief, disoriented moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The whipping post, Luke's intervention, the desperate ride through the darkness. She sat up quickly, Luke's oversized shirt tangling around her legs, and listened. The cabin was silent except for the crackling of a fire that must have been recently stoked. Clara slipped out of bed and moved to the window, peering out at the valley below. Morning mist clung to the hollows, and she could see the faint ribbon of the trail they'd followed last night. No riders, no dust clouds, no signs of pursuit. Yet, she found her ruined wedding dress where she'd left it and stared at it for a long moment, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to burn it immediately, to watch the symbol of her near enslavement turn to ash. But another part recognized that it might be useful evidence later, proof of what Garrison had tried to do. She folded it carefully and set it aside, then splashed cold water on her face from the basin. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Luke at the stove, cooking what smelled like bacon and coffee. He'd changed his shirt, and she could see fresh blood seeping through the bandage on his arm. He glanced up when he heard her, and something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, at seeing her in his shirt with her hair loose around her shoulders. "Morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Hope you don't mind. I figured we both needed a proper breakfast before we start tackling today's problems." "I don't mind," Clara said, suddenly aware of how intimate this felt. Standing in a man's kitchen wearing his clothes, watching him cook for her. "How's your arm?" "Been worse." Luke turned back to the stove, flipping bacon with practiced ease. "There's a trunk in the bedroom with some clothes that might fit you better than my shirt. They belong to someone else, but they're clean and serviceable." Clara heard the hesitation, the story he wasn't telling. A woman's clothes in a bachelor's cabin meant history, meant pain. She didn't press. "Thank you," she said instead. "I'll look after breakfast." They ate in companionable silence, both of them hungry enough that conversation could wait. The bacon was crispy, the coffee strong and bitter, and there were biscuits that Luke must have made before dawn. Clara found herself watching him between bites, noting the economy of his movements, the way his eyes constantly flickered to the windows as if expecting trouble. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" she asked finally. Luke shrugged. "Enough. I'm used to keeping watch. Old habit from the war." "You fought?" "For a while. Union cavalry, until I took a saber across the ribs and they sent me home to recover. By the time I was healed, the war was over. Probably saved my life, that wound." He touched his side absently, where Clara knew one of those old scars must be. "A lot of my unit didn't make it to Appomattox." Clara set down her coffee cup. "Is that where you learned to move so fast? To draw like you did yesterday?" "Partly. The war taught me violence. What came after taught me survival. Luke stood and began clearing the dishes. But we should talk about what happens now. About the choice you made last night. To fight, Clara said. I meant it, Luke. I want to bring Garrison down. I know you did, and I respect that. But you need to understand what you're choosing. Garrison isn't just powerful. He's connected. He's got the sheriff in his pocket, half the county commissioners on his payroll, and probably a dozen other officials who owe him favors. Taking him on means going up against the entire corrupt system he's built. So we expose that system, Clara said. Show people what he really is. People already know what he is. They just don't care as long as it's not happening to them. Luke leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. But there might be a way. Garrison's power comes from two sources, his money and his reputation. We can't touch his money directly. He's got that locked up tighter than a bank vault. But his reputation, that's vulnerable. Clara leaned forward, interested. How? Men like Garrison, they build their empires on the appearance of respectability. Sure, everyone knows he's ruthless, maybe even cruel, but as long as he operates within the letter of the law, or appears to, he maintains that veneer of legitimacy. The contracts, the legal proceedings, the public displays like yesterday's attempted whipping. It's all about making his cruelty look justified. But it's not, Clara said. The contract he forced my father to sign was legal enough to stand up in court, unfortunately. Even if we proved your father was drunk when he signed it, Garrison has witnesses swearing otherwise. That's the genius of his system. He makes his victims complicit in their own destruction. Clara felt frustration rising. Then how do we fight that? If the law protects him and people are too afraid to stand against him, we find what he's hiding, Luke said. Every man has secrets, Clara. Things he doesn't want the world to know. Garrison projects this image of a successful businessman, a pillar of the community. But I'd bet my last dollar there's something rotten underneath. Something that would turn even his bought and paid for supporters against him if it came to light. What kind of something? Luke moved to the window, scanning the valley again. Could be anything. Embezzlement from the town funds, claim jumping on federal land. Maybe he's running schemes that cross state lines, which would bring in federal marshals. Or maybe it's something personal, a family he abandoned, a crime from his past. Men don't get as powerful as Garrison without leaving bodies in their wake, literal or figurative. Clara joined him at the window, standing close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. So we need to investigate him, dig into his past, find the skeleton in his closet. That's the idea. But it won't be easy. Garrison keeps his secrets well guarded, and asking too many questions will tip him off that we're not just running or hiding. What about your forged papers? Clara asked. How long before he proves they're fake? 3 days? Maybe 4 if we're lucky. He'll have sent telegrams to Denver by now, demanding they check the land office records. When they come back showing no such filing exists, he'll know for certain. After that, he'll move fast, probably get the sheriff to issue a warrant for my arrest on fraud charges, then come after both of us. 3 days. Clara felt the weight of that deadline settling over her. 3 days to find something damning enough to destroy Silas Garrison's empire, or 3 days until they'd have to run or fight with no ammunition but desperation. Then we'd better start now, she said. Where do we begin? Luke turned to face her, and she saw approval in his eyes. We start with what we know. Garrison came to Clearwater about 15 years ago, already wealthy. Before that, no one seems to know much about him. That's our first question. Where did his money come from? Men don't just appear out of nowhere with the kind of capital he had. Who would know? Old-timers mostly, people who were here when he arrived. The problem is, most of them are either dead, bought off, or too scared to talk. Luke paused, thinking. But there's one person who might help. Amos Brennan. He runs the telegraph office, been there for 20 years. He's also about the only man in Clearwater who seems immune to Garrison's influence. Clara knew Amos slightly, a gruff, solitary man who kept to himself and had a reputation for absolute discretion about the messages he transmitted. You think he'd talk to us? Maybe, if we approach it right. Amos doesn't like Garrison, but he's also not stupid. We'd need to give him a reason to risk himself. What about Mrs. Patterson? Clara asked. She helped me before. Maybe she knows something. Luke shook his head. Too dangerous for her. Garrison might already suspect she was involved in your escape. We bring her into this, we're painting a target on her back. He was right, Clara knew, but it chafed. She hated the idea of good people suffering while monsters like Garrison walked free. There's another angle, Luke said. Garrison's business dealings. He owns the bank, half a dozen businesses in town, and probably twice that in surrounding areas. That kind of expansion requires documentation. Loan papers, property deeds, business licenses. If there's fraud anywhere in his empire, it'll be in those records. How do we get access to them? The county clerk's office keeps copies of all property transactions. It's public record technically, but I doubt Garrison would let us just walk in and start browsing through his files. Clara thought for a moment. What if we didn't walk in? What if we broke in? Luke raised an eyebrow. Breaking into a government building is a serious crime, Clara. We get caught. Garrison won't need fake charges to throw us in jail. But if we don't get caught, we might find exactly what we need. Clara felt energy building inside her, the same reckless courage that had driven her to curse Garrison in the church. The clerk's office is in the town hall, right? Next to the sheriff's office? Which makes it incredibly dangerous. Or incredibly perfect. Everyone would assume we'd never be stupid enough to break in right under Sheriff Hayes' nose. They won't be watching for it. Luke studied her for a long moment, and Clara could see him weighing the risks, calculating odds. Finally, he nodded slowly. It's insane. Completely, utterly insane. Which means it might just work. But we'd need to plan it carefully. The town hall locks up at sunset, and Hayes usually does a round every 2 hours through the night. So we go in between rounds. 2 hours should be enough time to search the files. Assuming we can pick the lock, avoid making noise and get out before Hayes comes back. Luke moved to the table and pulled out paper and a pencil. We'll need to scout it first, figure out the layout, identify any problems. I know the layout, Clara said. I've been in the clerk's office before, when my father was alive and still managing the farm properly. The property records are filed by year and then alphabetically by owner name. Garrison's files would be in multiple years, but they'd be together in each section. Luke began sketching a rough map of the town hall. Tell me everything you remember. Every detail could matter. For the next hour, they planned. Clara described the clerk's office, the rows of filing cabinets, the desk where the clerk worked, the windows that looked out onto the street. Luke added details about the sheriff's office, the patrol patterns he'd observed, the blind spots in the building's security. We'll need a distraction, Luke said finally. Something to pull Hayes away from the town hall if he decides to make an early round. What kind of distraction? I'm thinking of fire. Nothing dangerous, just enough smoke to get attention. Maybe in one of the empty buildings on the east end of town. Hayes will have to respond, and it'll give us the time we need. Clara felt a flutter of nerves. This was real. They were actually planning to break into the town hall, to steal records that might bring down Silas Garrison. If they succeeded, it could change everything. If they failed... When? She asked. Tonight. The longer we wait, the more time Garrison has to make his move. And we need to do this while those forged papers are still giving us cover, making him think we're just sitting here waiting for his lawyers to disprove our claim. Won't he be watching the cabin? Probably has men on the trail right now. But there's another way down the mountain, an old mining track that comes out near the Miller farm, about 3 miles from town. We can use that, circle around, come into Clearwater from the south where he won't be expecting us. Clara felt her heart racing. This was happening. Tonight they would walk back into danger, back into Garrison's territory, and try to steal the evidence they needed to destroy him. I should change, she said. Find those clothes you mentioned. Luke nodded, his expression serious. Clara, before you do, you should know that once we commit to this, there's no going back. If Garrison catches us, he'll kill us. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. He can't afford to let us live, not after we've challenged him so publicly. I know. And even if we succeed, even if we find evidence and expose him, he might still come after us. Men like Garrison don't accept defeat. They find ways to strike back, to make you pay even as their empires crumble. Clara moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the small scar on his chin that she hadn't noticed before. Luke, I've been living in fear for months. Fear of Garrison, fear of what he'd do to me, fear of a future trapped in a marriage that would slowly kill everything I am. Yesterday, tied to that post, I thought I was going to die. Or worse, that I'd survive and be broken. She reached out and touched his hand, the one that had caught the whip meant for her back. But you gave me something more valuable than safety. You gave me a choice, the chance to fight back, to maybe make a difference. I won't waste that. I won't let fear control me anymore. Luke's fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. You're remarkable, you know that? Most people would take the easy way out, run and hide and pray Garrison never finds them. Most people haven't had the luxury of learning that hiding doesn't work, that monsters like Garrison will always find you unless you make them stop looking. Clara squeezed his hand once, then released it. I'll get changed. We should probably rest before tonight. It's going to be a long one. She returned to the bedroom and opened the trunk Luke had mentioned. Inside were women's clothes, simple dresses, practical skirts and blouses, undergarments that had been carefully folded and preserved. Clara pulled out a dark blue dress that looked like it would fit, along with the necessary undergarments. As she changed, she couldn't help wondering about the woman who'd worn these clothes. Someone Luke had cared about clearly. Someone who'd left or died or disappeared from his life, leaving only these garments behind. Another ghost to add to the collection that seemed to haunt him. The dress fit reasonably well, a bit loose in the waist but otherwise serviceable. There were boots, too, worn but sturdy. Clara laced them up and checked her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser. She looked different than she had yesterday, older somehow, harder. The girl who'd stood in the church and cursed Silas. Garrison felt like a stranger. This person looking back at her was someone who could break into a government building and face down killers. She wasn't sure if that was progress or just a different kind of loss. When she emerged, Luke was cleaning his gun, checking the action with the careful attention of a man who knew his life might depend on it. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or memory. They fit, he said simply. They do. Luke, the woman who... Her name was Elizabeth, he said, cutting her off gently. She was my wife. Died 4 years ago of cholera down in Texas. I couldn't save her, couldn't even hold her at the end. The doctors wouldn't let me near for fear I'd catch it too. Clara felt her heart break a little for him. I'm sorry. So am I. She was good, kind, deserved better than dying in a pest house, delirious and alone. Luke set the gun aside. I kept her clothes thinking maybe I'd give them to someone who needed them. Guess I finally found the right person. You loved her. I did. Still do, in a way. But she's gone, and I'm still here, and life keeps moving forward whether we're ready or not. He stood, rolling his shoulders as if to shake off the weight of memory. You should rest. We've got maybe 8 hours before we need to head into town. I'll keep watch. But Clara wasn't ready to rest, wasn't ready to be alone with her thoughts about what tonight might bring. Teach me, she said instead. Teach you what? To shoot. To fight. Whatever you think I need to know to survive what's coming. Luke hesitated. Clara, there's not enough time to... Then teach me what you can. Even if it's just the basics. I won't be helpless again, Luke. I won't stand there waiting for someone else to save me. Something in her voice must have convinced him because he nodded slowly. All right, come on. He led her outside to a small clearing behind the cabin. The morning sun was fully up now, warming the air but not yet hot. Luke positioned her facing a large tree about 20 yards away, then stood behind her and placed his gun in her hands. It's heavier than you expect, he said, his voice close to her ear, and it kicks when you fire. Most people, first time they shoot, they close their eyes right before they pull the trigger. Fight that instinct. Keep your eyes open. Focus on your target. Clara felt the weight of the Colt in her hands, the cold metal against her palms. It was a thing designed for one purpose only, to kill. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, she felt a strange sense of power. Both hands, Luke instructed, adjusting her grip. Line up the sights with your target. Breathe in, let it out halfway, then squeeze the trigger gently. Don't jerk it. Clara did as he said, focusing on the tree trunk, on the rough bark that marked where she should aim. She breathed in, let it out, squeezed. The gun roared and bucked in her hands, the recoil driving her back a step. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt 3 feet to the left of the tree. Again, Luke said, you jerked it at the last second. Trust the process. Trust yourself. Clara raised the gun again, correcting her stance. This time when she fired, the bullet hit the tree, though far from where she'd aimed. Better, Luke said. 5 more shots. Make each one count. They worked together through the morning, Luke patient and methodical, Clara determined and focused. By the time the gun was empty, she was hitting the tree consistently, even if she couldn't control exactly where on the trunk the bullet struck. That's enough for now, Luke said, taking the gun back to reload it. You won't become a sharpshooter overnight, but at least now you know which end to point at the enemy. Will I have to use it tonight? Clara asked. I hope not. Best scenario, we get in and out without anyone knowing we were there. But if things go wrong, if we're cornered... He trailed off, meeting her eyes. Could you pull the trigger if you had to? If it was Garrison or Dutch or one of his men, and it was you or them? Clara thought about it honestly. Could she take a human life? Could she look another person in the eye and end them? 2 days ago, she would have said no, but that was before the whipping post, before she'd felt the absolute powerlessness of being at someone's mercy. Yes, she said. If it meant staying free, staying alive, yes, I could. Luke nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. Then let's hope it doesn't come to that. Come on, let's head back inside. You should eat something, then rest. I'll wake you in the afternoon and we'll go over the plan again. But as they walked back to the cabin, Clara felt Luke tense beside her. His hand moved to his gun and his eyes locked on something in the distance. What is it? Clara asked, following his gaze. Ryder, Luke said quietly, coming up the main trail, moving fast. Clara's heart jumped into her throat. Garrison's men? Maybe. Get inside. If this goes bad, there's a rifle above the fireplace and extra ammunition in the drawer of the bedside table. You remember what I taught you? Yes. Good. Now go. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him, but she recognized the tone in his voice, the one that said this wasn't negotiable. She hurried inside and positioned herself by the window where she could see without being easily seen. The rider was closer now, and Clara could make out more details. It was a woman, she realized with surprise, riding astride in a way that would scandalize the proper ladies of Clearwater. As she drew near, Clara recognized her. Mrs. Patterson. Luke must have recognized her too because he relaxed slightly, though he didn't move his hand from his gun. Mrs. Patterson pulled up in front of the cabin, her horse lathered with sweat, her usually neat hair coming loose from its pins. Mr. Carver, she called out, breathless. Thank God I found you. Is Clara here? Is she safe? Clara emerged from the cabin before Luke could answer. I'm here, Mrs. Patterson. What's wrong? Did Garrison... It's not Garrison, Mrs. Patterson said, dismounting quickly. Her hands were shaking, Clara noticed, and there was real fear in her eyes. Well, not directly. It's Amos Brennan. He's dead. The words hit like a physical blow. Clara heard Luke curse quietly beside her. How? Luke asked sharply. They're calling it an accident, saying he fell down the stairs at the telegraph office, broke his neck. Mrs. Patterson's voice trembled. But Amos was 70 years old and careful as a cat. He'd walked those stairs thousands of times. He wouldn't just fall. Garrison, Clara said, the name tasting like poison. That's what I think too, and there's more. Mrs. Patterson pulled an envelope from inside her coat. Amos sent this to me yesterday evening before he died. Told the boy who delivered it that if anything happened to him, I should make sure you got it, both of you. Luke took the envelope, examining it carefully before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Amos's cramped handwriting. Luke read it quickly, his expression growing darker with each line. What does it say? Clara asked. Luke handed her the letter. Clara read, If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Garrison's been watching me close the last few days, and I know too much for him to let me keep breathing. I've been transmitting his telegrams for 15 years, and I'm good at my job, which means I remember things I'm not supposed to. 3 days ago, Garrison sent a telegram to someone in Santa Fe, someone named Valdez. It wasn't the first time I'd seen that name. Garrison's been corresponding with Valdez for months, always using code words, always marked urgent. I got curious, started keeping copies. I've hidden them in the one place Garrison would never think to look, inside the cover of the hymnal in the church, third pew from the back on the left. The telegrams prove what Garrison really is. They prove everything, but be careful. Valdez isn't just a business partner, he's a killer, and Garrison's already sent for him. Whatever you're planning, you'd better do it fast. A.B. Clara looked up from the letter, her mind racing. Valdez! Who is that? Trouble, Luke said grimly. Diego Valdez is a hired gun out of New Mexico territory. He's got a reputation for being thorough and creative. If Garrison's called him in, it means he's done playing by the rules. And these telegrams Amos hid, Clara said. They could be the evidence we need. If they're still there, if Garrison hasn't already found them. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. There's one more thing. The circuit judge is arriving tomorrow, 2 weeks early. Garrison pulled strings, called in favors. He's planning to have you both arrested for fraud, Luke and Clara for breach of contract. Once the judge hears the case, with all of Garrison's bought witnesses, you'll both be locked up. And we all know what happens to people in cells when Garrison wants them silenced. The timeline had just collapsed. They thought they had 3 days. Now they had less than 24 hours before Garrison had the law on his side. We moved tonight, Luke said, earlier than planned, but first we need those telegrams. Mrs. Patterson, is the church locked? Reverend Thomas keeps it open during the day for private prayer, but Garrison's had men watching it since yesterday. I think he suspects Amos might have left something behind. How many men? 2 that I saw. One by the front entrance, one around back. Luke was already moving, heading into the cabin. Clara, change into something dark. We're going to church. In broad daylight? Mrs. Patterson looked horrified. You'll be seen! That's the idea, Luke said. Garrison expects us to sneak around, to hide. So we'll walk right in the front door, bold as brass. Sometimes the best disguise is confidence. Clara hurried to change while Luke gathered supplies. When she emerged in Elizabeth's dark dress with a bonnet to hide her face, Luke was checking his guns, both the Colt and a smaller Derringer that he tucked into his boot. Mrs. Patterson, Luke said, you need to get out of town. If Garrison finds out you warned us, you'll be next on his list. I'm not running, Mrs. Patterson said, drawing herself up with surprising dignity. This is my town, too. I've lived here 30 years, and I'll be damned if I let Silas Garrison drive me out. Besides, you'll need someone on the inside, someone who can move freely and pass messages. Luke looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara touched his arm. She's right, and we don't have time to debate. If we're doing this, we need to go now. The ride down the mountain was tense, all 3 of them watching for signs of Garrison's men. But the mining trail Luke had mentioned was clear, and they reached the outskirts of Clearwater without incident. Mrs. Patterson split off from them there, heading to her store to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Luke and Clara continued toward the church on foot, leading their horses. Luke had pulled his hat low and walked with a slight limp, changing his silhouette. Clara kept her face down, hidden by the bonnet, playing the part of a modest woman heading to prayer. Remember, Luke murmured as the church came into view, we're just a couple seeking spiritual guidance. Nothing suspicious. We go in, retrieve the telegrams, and walk out, nice and calm. Clara could see the guard by the front entrance, one of Garrison's ranch hands, a man named Pete, who she recognized from town. He straightened when he saw them approaching, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. Church is closed for private services, Pete said as they drew near. Since when does God's house close its doors? Luke replied, his accent shifting slightly, taking on a rougher edge. My wife and I need to pray. Our son's sick with fever, and the doctor says it could go either way. You going to tell a desperate father he can't ask the Lord for help? The lie was delivered with perfect conviction, with just enough grief in Luke's voice to sound genuine. Clara added to it by dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the distraught mother. Pete shifted uncomfortably. I got orders. No one goes in without Mr. Garrison's say-so. Then get his say-so, Luke said. Go on. We'll wait right here. But every minute you waste is a minute my boy might be dying. Pete hesitated, clearly torn between his orders and the social pressure of denying a couple access to church in a time of crisis. Finally, he nodded. Wait here. Don't move. He turned and headed around the building, presumably to consult with the other guard. The moment he was out of sight, Luke grabbed Clara's hand and they moved quickly to the church entrance. "He'll be back in seconds," Luke whispered, pulling open the door. "Find that hymnal. Third pew from the back, left side." They slipped inside the church, and Clara was immediately struck by the smell. Incense and old wood and the ghost of Sunday sermons. The interior was dim, lit only by the sunlight filtering through stained glass windows. Clara rushed to the third pew from the back, found the hymnal, and opened the back cover. Nothing. Her heart sank. Garrison had found them first. They were too late. Then she noticed the hymnal in the rack in front of that pew, also in the third row from the back, technically. She grabbed it, opened the cover, and nearly sobbed with relief. Folded papers were tucked inside, covered in Amos's handwriting. "Got them," she hissed to Luke, who was watching the door. "Then we need to—" The door burst open and Pete rushed in, gun drawn, the second guard right behind him. "I knew it! You ain't got no sick kid! Hands up, both of you!" Luke's hands rose slowly, but Clara could see him calculating, looking for an opening. "Easy now. We're just here to pray." "You're here to steal something, more like. Mr. Garrison said you might try. Said you're getting desperate." Pete gestured with his gun. "You come with us. Mr. Garrison's going to want to see you both." "I don't think so," Luke said, and moved. It happened faster than Clara could follow. Luke's hand dropped to his gun, but instead of drawing, he grabbed a heavy candlestick from the nearby stand and hurled it at Pete. The guard jerked back instinctively, and in that moment, Luke closed the distance between them. The gun went off, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, but the shot went wide. Luke had Pete's wrist, was twisting it brutally, and the gun clattered to the floor. The second guard was raising his weapon, trying to get a clear shot, and Clara did the only thing she could think of. She threw the hymnal at his face. It was a ridiculous weapon, but surprise was on her side. The guard flinched, and Clara rushed him, remembering what Luke had taught her about fighting. Go for the vulnerable spots. Don't fight fair. She drove her knee up into his groin with all her strength. The guard made a strangled sound and doubled over. Clara grabbed his gun arm, trying to wrestle the weapon away, but he was stronger than her and fighting through the pain. Then Luke was there, having dispatched Pete with a brutal punch that left the man unconscious on the floor. He grabbed the second guard and slammed him against the wall, and within seconds both of Garrison's men were down. "Are you hurt?" Luke asked, breathing hard. "No, you?" "I'm fine, but we need to move. Those gunshots will bring every one of Garrison's men in town." He grabbed the telegrams from where Clara had dropped them and stuffed them inside his shirt. "Out the back. Now!" They ran through the church, bursting out the back door into the alley behind. Clara could already hear shouts, the sound of running feet. Garrison's men were converging on the church. "This way," Luke said, pulling her toward where they'd left the horses. But as they rounded the corner, they found their path blocked. Silas Garrison stood there with 6 armed men, and his smile was the most terrible thing Clara had ever seen. "Going somewhere?" Garrison asked pleasantly. "I do hope you were planning to stop by and say goodbye before leaving my town." Luke's hand moved toward his gun, but Garrison's men were already aiming at them, fingers on triggers. 6 against 1, even for someone as fast as Luke, were impossible odds. Clara felt her stomach drop as she realized they'd been outmaneuvered, outthought. Garrison had known exactly what they'd do, had been waiting for them. "I wouldn't," Garrison said, his voice mild but his eyes cold as winter ice. "My men are a bit jumpy after you assaulted Pete and Jimmy in the Lord's house. Be a shame if they accidentally shot you both. Accidents happen so easily these days, don't they? Just ask poor Amos Brennan." "You killed him," Clara said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "He was an old man who never hurt anyone, and you killed him." Garrison's smile widened. "I did no such thing. Amos had an unfortunate fall, very tragic. The whole town is mourning his loss." He took a step closer, and Clara could smell his cologne, expensive and cloying. "But I'll admit, I'm not entirely broken up about it. The old fool was getting senile seeing conspiracies where there were none. Started keeping records he shouldn't have kept. That's the problem with people who can't mind their own business. They tend to meet with accidents." "Like my father?" Clara asked, sudden understanding flooding through her. "His death wasn't from fever, was it? You needed his land, but he wouldn't sell unless he was desperate. So you made him desperate, made him drink more, destroyed his credit around town, isolated him until he had nowhere else to turn. Garrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Acknowledgement, maybe, or pride in his own cleverness. Your father was a drunk, Clara. That's not my fault. I simply provided opportunities for him to indulge his weakness, and when he finally saw reason and agreed to my generous offer, well, that was just good business. You're a monster, Clara said. I'm a businessman. There's a difference, though I don't expect someone like you to understand it. Garrison gestured to his men. Take them. We'll let the judge decide their fate tomorrow. Until then, they can enjoy the hospitality of our fine jail. Luke's jaw tightened. Those papers I showed you weren't the only copies. I've got the originals filed safely away. You lock us up and they'll surface. Your lawyers will be fighting my claim for years. It was a bluff. Clara knew it and suspected Garrison did too. But the rancher hesitated, uncertainty crossing his face for just a moment. Then I guess we'll have to make sure you're not around to pursue that claim, Garrison said. Sheriff Hayes has been very concerned about the rising crime in our town. 2 dangerous criminals breaking into the church, assaulting honest citizens, attempting to steal property. Why, a man could get hurt resisting arrest. Could even get killed. Clara's blood ran cold. Garrison wasn't even pretending anymore. He was going to have them murdered and call it legal. Before you do something you can't undo, Luke said, his voice steady despite the guns pointed at him, you might want to know what we found in that church. What Amos left behind. Garrison's eyes narrowed. Empty threats won't save you, Carver. Not threats. Facts. Luke's hand moved slowly toward his shirt, and Garrison's men tensed. Easy. I'm just going to show you something. He pulled out one of the telegrams, unfolded it, and held it up so Garrison could see. Clara watched the rancher's face change as he read, watched the color drain from his cheeks. That's right, Luke said. Amos kept copies. Every telegram you sent to Diego Valdez, every instruction about eliminating competitors, every payment for services rendered, every detail of your arrangement with a known killer. This one here, it's particularly interesting. The one where you discuss eliminating Marcus Webb if he doesn't stop asking questions about land deeds. The one dated 3 days before Marcus's barn mysteriously burned down with him inside. Clara hadn't read all the telegrams yet, but she saw the truth of it on Garrison's face. Marcus Webb had died 6 months ago in a fire everyone had called accidental. But it hadn't been an accident. None of it had been accidents. There's more, Luke continued, his voice hardening. Telegrams about fraudulent land claims, about bribing county officials, about threatening families until they sold their property for pennies on the dollar. Amos documented 15 years of your crimes, Garrison. Every murder, every theft, every corrupt deal, and we've got them all. Give me those papers, Garrison demanded, his composure cracking. Give them to me now, or I'll... You'll what? Shoot us in front of witnesses? Luke gestured toward the street, where Clara could see townspeople gathering, drawn by the commotion. There's already a crowd forming. You kill us now, and you'll have to explain why. And once people start asking questions, once they start looking into Amos's death and these telegrams, your whole empire comes crashing down. Garrison's hand moved to his own gun, and for a moment Clara thought he might actually do it, might shoot them both despite the risk. But then Sheriff Hayes came running up, his deputy behind him, both men out of breath. Mr. Garrison, we heard shots, Hayes said, then saw Luke and Clara. Are these the ones who broke into the church? They are, Garrison said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Arrest them. Assault, theft, trespassing. I want them locked up until the judge arrives tomorrow. Hayes moved forward, pulling out iron shackles, but Luke held up the telegram. Sheriff, before you do that, you might want to see what we found. Evidence of multiple murders, including Marcus Webb. Your old friend Marcus, remember? The one you promised his widow you'd investigate? Hayes froze, his eyes moving from the telegram to Garrison and back again. Clara could see the conflict in his face, fear of Garrison warring with whatever vestige of conscience he still possessed. Don't listen to him, Garrison snapped. Those papers are forgeries, just like the land deeds. These two are desperate, making up wild stories. Then you won't mind if we show them to the judge tomorrow, Luke said. Let him decide if they're real or fake. After all, if they're forgeries, you've got nothing to worry about. The crowd was growing larger now, and Clara could hear whispers, see people craning their necks to see what was happening. Mrs. Patterson was there, Clara noticed, and old Doc Morrison, and the Meyer family who ran the dry goods store. The whole town was watching. "Give me those papers," Garrison repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Last chance, Carver." "No," Luke said simply, "but I'll tell you what I will do. I'll make you a deal. You drop your claim on Clara, you leave town and never come back, and these telegrams disappear. No prosecution, no scandal. You just walk away with whatever you can carry." Garrison laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think I'm going to abandon everything I've built because of some pieces of paper? This is my town. These are my people. You're nobody, Carver. A drifter with a gun and a death wish. You think you can threaten me?" "I don't think it," Luke said. "I know it, because you're not the only one who can play dirty, Garrison. Those telegrams? We made copies. Left them with someone trustworthy, someone outside your reach. Anything happens to us, those copies get sent to the federal marshals, to the newspapers in Denver and Santa Fe, to every authority that might be interested in a frontier tyrant who's been running his own private kingdom." It was another bluff, Clara realized. They hadn't had time to make copies, but Garrison didn't know that, and uncertainty flickered across his face again. "You're lying," he said, but there was doubt in his voice now. "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. Question is, are you willing to bet your entire empire on it?" Luke took a step forward, and Garrison's men shifted nervously. "Here's how this plays out, Garrison. You've got two choices. First choice, you back down. You release Clara from that contract, you get on a horse, and you ride out of Clearwater. Start over somewhere else, somewhere your reputation hasn't preceded you. It's not ideal, but you walk away alive and free. And the second choice? You push this. You have us arrested, try to make those telegrams disappear, maybe even succeed in having us killed. But then those copies surface. Federal marshals come investigating. They dig into every deal you've ever made, every property you've acquired, every convenient death that happened in your orbit. Even if they can't prove everything, even if some of it's circumstantial, it'll be enough. They'll strip you of everything, Garrison. Your money, your land, your freedom. You'll spend whatever years you have left in a federal prison, and your name will be remembered as a cautionary tale. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crowd had gone quiet, everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what Silas Garrison would do. Clara watched emotions war across his face: rage, fear, calculation, pride. This was a man who'd built an empire on intimidation and control, and now he was being backed into a corner by a cowboy and the woman he'd tried to break. "Sheriff Hayes," Garrison said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "I want those two arrested for theft and assault. Lock them up." Hayes hesitated, glancing at the crowd, at the telegram still visible in Luke's hand. "Mr. Garrison, maybe we should—" "Now, Sheriff, that's an order." Hayes moved forward reluctantly, and Garrison's men closed in. Luke looked at Clara, and she saw the message in his eyes. "Trust me." He handed the telegrams to Hayes. "Read them, Sheriff," Luke said. "Every word. Then ask yourself if you want to be complicit in what they describe. Ask yourself if you can live with being Garrison's lapdog when the truth comes out." Hayes took the papers with shaking hands, and Garrison lunged for them. "Those are stolen property. You have no right." But Hayes stepped back, his eyes already scanning the first page. Clara watched his face change as he read, watched the color drain away, and then rush back in angry red. "Jesus Christ," Hayes whispered. "Marcus? You said it was an accident. You said—" "It was an accident," Garrison insisted. "Those are lies, forgeries designed to—" "This is Amos's handwriting," Hayes said, his voice growing stronger. "I've seen it 1,000 times. These are real, Garrison. You had Marcus killed, and Sarah Jennings, and Tom Butterfield, and—" He looked up, and for the first time since Clara had known him, Sheriff Hayes looked like a lawman instead of a coward. "How many? How many people have you murdered?" "I haven't murdered anyone," Garrison said, but his voice had lost its authority. "Valdez is a business associate. Those telegrams are taken out of context." "Valdez is a killer," Hayes said. "Everyone knows it, and you've been paying him to eliminate anyone who stood in your way." He turned to his deputy. "Take Mr. Garrison into custody. Charges of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, intimidation." "You can't arrest me," Garrison roared. I own you, Hayes. I own this whole goddamn town. Not anymore, Hayes said, and Clara heard something break in his voice. Years of fear and shame finally giving way to something like dignity. Not ever again. Garrison's men looked at each other, uncertain. They'd signed on to intimidate farmers and rough up troublemakers, not to stand with a murderer against the law. One by one, they stepped back, holstering their weapons. "You're all fired," Garrison screamed at them. "Every one of you! You'll never work in this territory again." But no one was listening to him anymore. Hayes had the shackles out, was moving toward Garrison with grim determination. The rancher backed away, his hand going to his gun, and suddenly Clara saw how this would end. Garrison wasn't a man who could accept defeat, wasn't a man who could go quietly to a cell. "Luke," she said urgently, but he'd already seen it too. Garrison's gun cleared leather, and for a frozen moment, everyone stood paralyzed. Then several things happened at once. Hayes dove to the side, shouting a warning. Luke pushed Clara behind him and drew his own weapon, and Silas Garrison, the man who'd terrorized Clearwater for 15 years, aimed his gun not at Luke or Hayes, but at Clara. "If I can't have you," Garrison said, his face twisted with rage, "no one will." The gun came up, the hammer cocked back, and Clara knew she was about to die. She could see it in Garrison's eyes, the absolute commitment to pulling that trigger. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into eternity. Then Luke's gun spoke. The shot took Garrison in the shoulder, spinning him around. His own gun fired wild, the bullet shattering a window in the building behind Clara. Garrison stumbled, clutching his wounded shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "It's over, Garrison," Luke said, his gun still trained on the fallen man. "You're done." But Garrison wasn't done. Even wounded, even defeated, he was reaching for his gun where it had fallen. Hayes got there first, kicking it away, and then the deputy was there with the shackles, roughly securing Garrison's wrists. "You'll pay for this." Garrison spat at Luke, at Clara, at everyone. "All of you. Valdez will what?" a new voice asked, and everyone turned. A man stood at the edge of the crowd, and Clara felt her blood run cold. He was dressed in black with silver conchos on his belt and a pair of matched pistols hanging low on his hips. His face was dark and weathered, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. Diego Valdez, the killer from Garrison's telegrams. "Well, this is interesting," Valdez said, his accent thick but his English clear. "I ride into town expecting to collect payment for a job, and instead I find my employer in chains and a crowd ready to lynch him." His eyes found Luke, and he smiled. "You must be the one causing all this trouble, the cowboy who caught the whip." Luke shifted slightly, positioning himself more completely between Valdez and Clara. "Job's canceled, Valdez. Your employer's going to prison. Best thing you can do is ride out of here and forget you ever knew Silas Garrison." Valdez laughed. "Ah, but I've been paid already, half up front, as is my custom. And Mr. Garrison, he wanted 2 people eliminated, a man and a woman. Funny thing is, I think I'm looking at them right now." The crowd scattered, people diving for cover, leaving only Luke, Clara, and Sheriff Hayes standing in the street with Valdez. Hayes had his gun out but looked terrified, clearly outmatched. "This doesn't have to happen," Luke said. "Garrison can't pay you the other half. The job's void." "But my reputation isn't," Valdez said. "I've never left a job unfinished. People know that about me. They know when Diego Valdez takes a contract, that contract gets fulfilled. I don't do this for the money anymore, amigo. I do it for the principle." His hands moved to his guns, and Clara knew they were about to die. Luke was fast, but Valdez was a professional killer, and he had the advantage of being prepared, relaxed, ready. "Wait," Clara said, stepping out from behind Luke. "If you're going to kill us, at least tell me one thing first. Did you kill my father?" Valdez tilted his head, considering. "The drunk with the farm? No, that one died on his own. The fever, as I recall. Garrison wanted me to do it, said the old man was taking too long to die naturally, but the sickness beat me to it." Clara felt a strange relief. Her father had been weak, had betrayed her, but at least his death had been natural. At least he hadn't suffered at this monster's hands. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Then to Luke, "I'm sorry I got you into this." "You didn't get me into anything," Luke said. I walked into it with my eyes open, and I'd do it again. Valdez nodded approvingly. Such nobility. It's almost a shame. I think in another life, we could have been friends, you and I. You have a warrior's heart. He flexed his fingers, preparing to draw. But business is business. On 3. 1. A rifle shot cracked across the square, and Valdez jerked, blood blooming on his chest. He looked down in surprise, then up at the building behind them, where Mrs. Patterson stood in a second-story window with a smoking rifle. 2, she said quietly, and fired again. Valdez fell, his guns never clearing leather, and didn't move again. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara stared at Mrs. Patterson, sweet, gentle Mrs. Patterson who ran the general store and taught Sunday school, standing there with a rifle in her hands and a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "My husband was a buffalo hunter," Mrs. Patterson said calmly. "Before we came to Clearwater, he taught me to shoot. I'm a bit rusty, but some things you don't forget." She looked at Clara. "I told you I wasn't running. This is my town too." Hayes was the first to recover. He moved to Valdez's body, checked for a pulse, and shook his head. "Dead." He looked up at Mrs. Patterson. That was self-defense. Defense of others. "You saved lives here today, ma'am." "I know," Mrs. Patterson said. She lowered the rifle and disappeared from the window. Clara felt her knees go weak, and Luke caught her, holding her steady. "It's over," he said. "It's really over." But even as he said it, Clara heard a commotion from where Garrison stood in custody. The rancher had gone pale, swaying on his feet, and blood was spreading across his shirt much faster than it should from a shoulder wound. "The bullet must have hit an artery," Doc Morrison said, pushing through the crowd and examining Garrison. "We need to get him to my office now, or he'll bleed out." They got Garrison onto a makeshift stretcher, but Clara could see it was already too late. The rancher's eyes were glazing over, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked at Clara as they carried him past, and his lips moved. She had to lean close to hear him. "You should have just married me," Garrison whispered. "All of this for nothing." Then his eyes went blank, and Silas Garrison, who had ruled Clearwater like a king for 15 years, was gone. The crowd stood in shocked silence. Sheriff Hayes removed his hat, though whether out of respect or relief, Clara couldn't tell. Luke's arm was still around her, and she leaned into him, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settling over her like a physical thing. "Is it really over?" she asked again, needing to hear it, needing to believe it. "It is," Luke said. "Garrison's dead. Valdez is dead. The telegrams prove everything. You're free, Clara, truly free." Free. The word felt strange, unfamiliar. For so long she'd been defined by her lack of freedom, by the chains of debt and contract and fear. Now those chains were broken, and she didn't quite know who she was without them. The circuit judge arrived the next day as scheduled and presided over a hasty inquest. The telegrams were entered into evidence, and witness after witness came forward, people who'd been too afraid to speak before, but who now told stories of intimidation, fraud, and defeat and violence. The judge declared Garrison's death a lawful killing in defense of others, cleared Mrs. Patterson of any wrongdoing, and nullified every contract Garrison had made under duress. Clara's father's farm was returned to her, free and clear. The debts Garrison had claimed were examined and found to be largely fabricated, supported by forged documents. The land was hers, and with it, her future. But that future felt impossibly large and uncertain as she stood in front of the cabin 3 days later, her few belongings packed and ready to go. Luke was saddling his horse, preparing to ride out. He'd done what he came to do, had saved her life, and helped free a town from tyranny. Now he was leaving, and Clara felt something in her chest crack at the thought. "You could stay," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "The farm, it's too much for one person. I could use help getting it running again." Luke paused in his work, his back to her. "Clara, I know what you said about this being temporary, about moving on once I was safe, but..." She moved closer, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders. "You don't have to keep running from your ghosts, Luke. You've proven you're not the man who stood by while Miguel died. You've proven it 100 times over. Have I? Luke turned to face her, and his eyes were filled with old pain. Or did I just trade one set of ghosts for another? Every time I close my eyes, I see Garrison dying. I see Valdez falling. I tell myself they deserved it, that the world's better without them, but you're not a killer, Clara finished. You're a protector. There's a difference. Is there? I've taken lives, Clara. I'll carry that weight forever. Then let me help you carry it. Clara reached out and took his hand, the one that had caught the whip meant for her back. You gave me my freedom. You gave me my life. The least I can do is share it with you. Luke looked at their joined hands, and Clara saw him struggling with something. When I told you about the 3 options, running, false marriage, or fighting, I didn't tell you about the 4th option. What 4th option? The one where we make this real. Where the lie becomes truth, not out of necessity, but out of choice. He raised his eyes to hers. I'm in love with you, Clara. I think I have been since I saw you tied to that post, defiant even in the face of death. But I can't ask you to tie yourself to a man like me, a man with more scars than future. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. You're not asking, I'm offering, I'm choosing. You taught me that I have that power, Luke, the power to choose my own path. And I choose you. You barely know me. I know you jumped between me and a whip. I know you forged documents to save a stranger. I know you've been carrying guilt for deaths that weren't your fault, and still you stood up when it mattered. I know you read Shakespeare and shoot straight and make terrible coffee. She smiled through her tears. I know enough. The rest we'll learn together. Luke pulled her close, and Clara went into his arms like coming home. I can't promise you an easy life, he said against her hair. My past might catch up with us. There might be more running, more fighting. I don't want easy, Clara said. I want real. I want a life I choose, with a man I choose. Everything else we'll face together. Luke pulled back just enough to see her face. Then I guess we should make those forged papers legal. Find a real preacher. File real documents. Is that a proposal, Mr. Carver? It is, Miss Whitfield, though I'm fresh out of rings and romantic speeches. Clara laughed, and it felt good, felt free. I don't need romance. I need partnership. I need someone who sees me as an equal, who'll stand beside me, not in front of me. I can do that, Luke said. I can be that. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious, and Clara kissed him back, tasting salt from her tears and the promise of a future she'd never dared to imagine. When they finally pulled apart, Clara saw Mrs. Patterson standing nearby with a covered basket, trying very hard to look like she hadn't just witnessed their embrace. I brought provisions, Mrs. Patterson said primly. For the farm. Thought you might need supplies to get started. Thank you, Clara said, unable to stop smiling. For everything. For the rifle shot, for the key, for being brave when we couldn't be, Mrs. Patterson interrupted. You showed us that tyranny only wins when good people stay silent. That's a lesson this town needed to learn. She set down the basket and pulled out an envelope. This is from the town council. It's not much, but it's restitution. Money from Garrison's accounts, being distributed to everyone he wronged. Your share. Clara opened the envelope and nearly gasped. There was enough money to rebuild the farm, to buy livestock and seed, to start fresh. The rest of Garrison's estate is being liquidated, Mrs. Patterson continued. Some going to his victims, some to the territorial government to compensate for his fraud. The bank is being taken over by new management from Denver. Clearwater is getting a fresh start, thanks to you both. After Mrs. Patterson left, Clara and Luke stood together, looking out at the valley, at the town below, where smoke rose from chimneys and life went on. The farm awaited them, and with it, all the hard work of rebuilding. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara felt hope. What do you think? Luke asked. Ready to start our life as an honest married couple? Almost, Clara said. She went to where she'd left the ruined wedding dress and picked it up. Together, she and Luke carried it to a clear spot away from the cabin. Luke struck a match, and Clara dropped the dress onto the small pyre they'd built. They watched it burn, the white fabric turning black and curling into ash. The dress that had symbolized her imprisonment, her near destruction, reduced to nothing but smoke rising into the clear Colorado sky. "Now I'm ready," Clara said, taking Luke's hand. They rode down the mountain together as the sun climbed higher, heading toward town and the preacher and a future they would build together. Behind them, the last wisps of smoke from the burning dress dissolved into the wind, carrying away the past. And ahead, Clearwater waited, a town learning to stand on its own, free from the shadow of tyranny. A place where a bride who'd been whipped for refusing a monster had found love with a cowboy who'd caught the lash and claimed her heart. The story would be told for years to come, growing with each retelling. But the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend. Two broken people had found each other in the darkest moment, had chosen to stand together against impossible odds, and had discovered that sometimes the greatest freedom comes not from running away, but from fighting for what matters. Clara Whitfield and Luke Carver were married 3 days later in the same church where they'd found Amos's telegrams. The whole town turned out, and Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire ceremony. They made their home on Clara's farm, and over the years they built something solid and real, not just a life, but a legacy. And when their children asked them how they met, Clara and Luke would exchange a glance and smile. Then Luke would say, "Your mother was in trouble, and I couldn't look away." And Clara would add, "Your father was running from his past, and I helped him find his future." It was the truest thing either of them ever said. The simplicity of that truth belied the complexity of making it real. Marriage, as Clara discovered in those first weeks, was both easier and harder than she'd imagined. Easy in the quiet moments, sitting together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, working side by side to repair the barn roof, falling asleep with Luke's arm around her, and knowing she was safe. Hard in the moments when his nightmares woke them both, when he'd jerk awake with his hand reaching for a gun that wasn't there, his eyes wild with memories of violence she could only guess at. The farm demanded everything they had. Years of neglect under her father's declining care had left fences broken, fields overgrown, and the house itself in desperate need of repair. Clara threw herself into the work with fierce determination, as if by rebuilding the farm she could somehow rebuild herself, transform the frightened girl who'd stood at the whipping post into someone stronger, someone whole. Luke worked beside her without complaint, though she sometimes caught him staring toward the horizon as if expecting trouble to come riding over it. The scars on his body were matched by deeper ones she couldn't see, couldn't touch. But slowly, day by day, she watched him begin to believe that peace might actually last, that happiness wasn't something that would be ripped away the moment he let himself feel it. It was on a crisp morning in late October, nearly a month after their wedding, that the first real test of their new life arrived. Clara was in the kitchen making bread when she heard horses approaching. Not the casual pace of a neighbor stopping by, but the purposeful rhythm of riders on business. Her hand stilled on the dough and she felt her heart rate quicken. Luke appeared in the doorway, his gun belt already strapped on. "Stay inside," he said, his voice tight. "Luke, we don't even know who it is. It could be anyone. Could be trouble. Just stay inside until I know." Clara watched through the window as Luke stepped onto the porch, his hand resting casually on his gun but ready to draw. 3 riders came into view, and Clara's breath caught. They wore badges, federal marshals from the look of them. The lead rider was a woman, which was unusual enough to make Clara look twice. She was tall and angular, with gray-streaked hair pulled back severely and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Lucas Carver?" the woman asked, her voice carrying authority. Luke's posture shifted slightly, and Clara recognized the change, the careful neutrality of a man confronting potential danger. "I'm Carver. What's this about?" The woman dismounted with easy grace. "I'm Marshal Catherine Brennan, and these are Deputies Ford and Martinez. We're here about the death of Silas Garrison and Diego Valdez." Clara's stomach dropped. She'd known this might come, known that federal authorities might investigate what had happened in Clearwater. But knowing and facing it were different things. "The inquest cleared everyone involved," Luke said carefully. "Judge ruled it lawful." "Judge Hendricks?" "Yes," we read his report. Marshal Brennan pulled out a folder from her saddlebag. Interesting reading. A powerful landowner dead, a notorious killer gunned down in the street, and a trove of telegrams revealing years of corruption and murder. The territorial governor wants to make sure justice was actually served and not just convenient. Justice was served. Garrison was a tyrant who terrorized this whole region. The telegrams prove it. So I've read. I've also read that you appeared in Clearwater with forged documents claiming ownership of land and a woman you'd never met before. That you inserted yourself into a local dispute using false pretenses and fraud. Brennan's eyes were sharp. That doesn't sound like justice, Mr. Carver. That sounds like a con that somehow went right. Clara couldn't stay inside anymore. She emerged onto the porch, and all three marshals turned to look at her. Marshal Brennan, I'm Clara Carver. And whatever you think my husband did, you need to understand. He saved my life. Garrison was going to have me whipped for refusing to marry him. Luke stopped it. By committing fraud, Brennan said, though her tone wasn't unkind. Mrs. Carver, I understand you were in a terrible situation, but the law doesn't give people the right to forge documents and impersonate property owners, no matter how noble their intentions. So what happens now? Luke asked. You arrest me? Take me back to Denver to stand trial? Brennan exchanged glances with her deputies. That's what we came here to decide. See, the thing about this case is that it's complicated. On one hand, you clearly broke the law. On the other hand, those forged documents led to the exposure of Garrison's crimes, which means we've been able to close at least a dozen murder cases that were gathering dust in various jurisdictions. The territorial governor is pleased about that. Makes him look good, cleaning up corruption. So this is about politics, Luke said, and Clara heard the bitterness in his voice. Everything is about politics when you get to our level, Brennan said bluntly. But it's also about justice, real justice, not just the letter of the law. So I need to understand something, Mr. Carver. Why did you do it? Why risk everything for a woman you'd never met? Luke was quiet for a long moment, and Clara held her breath, wondering what he would say, how much he would reveal. Because I failed to do it before, Luke said finally. 3 years ago, I watched an innocent man die because I was too much of a coward to stand up to the man killing him. I swore I wouldn't make that mistake again. When I saw Clara tied to that post, saw what Garrison was about to do, I knew I had a choice. Be a coward again, or be the man I should have been 3 years ago. And the forged documents? Where did you learn to create those? Books, study, practice. I figured if I was going to fight powerful men, I needed to understand how they used the law as a weapon. So I learned, taught myself enough legal knowledge to forge convincing papers when I needed them. Brennan smiled slightly. You know, if you'd put that intelligence to legitimate use, you could have been a lawyer yourself. Lawyers work within a system. Sometimes the system is the problem. True enough. Brennan turned to Clara. Mrs. Carver, the contract your father signed with Garrison, Judge Hendricks voided it. But there's a question about the property itself. Some of Garrison's associates are claiming that your father's debts were real, that the farm should be liquidated to pay them. Clara felt cold wash through her. But the judge said Garrison's contracts made under duress were void, but some of these debts predate Garrison's involvement. There's a saloon keeper in Denver claiming your father owed him $800 for whiskey. A hotel in Colorado Springs with a tab of $200. Other creditors coming out of the woodwork now that Garrison's dead and they think they can collect. We don't have that kind of money, Clara said, feeling the old fear rising. We've been using what the town gave us to rebuild, to buy seed and livestock. If they take the farm, they won't, Luke said firmly. He looked at Brennan. What do you want, Marshal? There's a reason you're here telling us this instead of just serving papers. What's the deal? Brennan's smile widened. I like you, Carver. You cut through the nonsense. Here's the situation. The governor wants to make an example of Clearwater, show that corruption won't be tolerated in the territory. But he also doesn't want to punish the people who expose that corruption. It's a delicate balance. So he wants us to be heroes, Luke said, noble citizens who stood up to tyranny. Something like that, which means we need to clean up the messier parts of your story, the forged documents, for instance. What if those documents weren't forged at all? What if there really was a legitimate transaction between you and Clara's father, properly filed, that Garrison simply didn't know about? Clara's eyes widened. You mean you'd create real documents? Backdate them? I mean, I'd correct an administrative oversight, Brennan said carefully. The Denver land office is notoriously disorganized. Papers get misfiled all the time. Sometimes documents that were properly submitted just don't get recorded right away. Could take years for them to surface. That's still fraud, Luke said. Just federal fraud instead of local. It's a solution, Brennan corrected. One that serves everyone's interests. You get legal ownership of the farm. Clara's father's real debts get paid from Garrison's seized assets as part of the restitution, and the territory gets a clean victory against corruption. Everyone wins. Luke and Clara exchanged glances. It was tempting, so tempting. Legal protection, financial security, and all it required was accepting help from the same system Luke had been fighting against. What's the catch? Luke asked. The catch is that you become the territory's poster children for standing up to corruption. The governor may want you to testify at various proceedings, help root out other Garrison-style operators in other towns. You'd be doing legitimate work, but you'd also be visible, public. That life of quiet farming you're building, it might get complicated. And if we refuse? Clara asked. Brennan's expression hardened slightly. Then I arrest your husband for fraud and forgery. The prosecutor in Denver would love to make an example of him, show that vigilante justice won't be tolerated even when it produces good results. Luke would likely serve 5 to 10 years in territorial prison. The farm would be liquidated to pay your father's debts, and you'd be left with nothing. Again. The threat hung in the air, crystal clear despite Brennan's measured tone. Cooperate and prosper, or resist and lose everything. How much time do we have to decide, Luke asked. I need an answer before I leave today. The governor wants this resolved quickly. Brennan gestured to her deputies. We'll water our horses and give you 30 minutes to discuss it. But Mrs. Carver, Mr. Carver, understand that this offer won't come again. The governor is being generous because it serves his political interests. If those interests change, so will his generosity. The marshals moved toward the water trough, giving Luke and Clara the illusion of privacy while staying close enough to prevent any escape attempt. Clara followed Luke into the house, her mind racing. It's a trap, Luke said as soon as they were inside. They're trying to own us just like Garrison did. Different methods, same result. But we'd keep the farm, Clara said. We'd be safe. Would we? Or would we just be trading one kind of cage for another? Luke paced the small kitchen, his frustration evident. I didn't forge those papers to become some political pawn. I did it to free you, to stop a monster. And you succeeded. Garrison is dead. But Luke, if you go to prison... Clara's voice broke slightly. I just found you. I can't lose you to some cell in Denver because you're too proud to accept help. It's not about pride, it's about principle. The moment we start making deals with people like the governor, start letting the system use us, we become part of the problem. We become the thing I've been fighting against. Clara moved to him, placed her hands on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. Maybe, or maybe we become something better. Maybe we take their offer and use it to help other people the way you helped me. If we're the territory's heroes, we have influence. We have a voice. We could actually change things instead of just running from them. Luke covered her hands with his. You'd be okay with that? Being public, being scrutinized, having to tell our story over and over? I'd be okay with anything that means we stay together, Clara said. And honestly, Luke, if our story can help other women trapped the way I was, if it can stop other tyrants like Garrison, isn't that worth some discomfort? You're braver than I am, Luke said softly. No, I'm just practical. And I'm tired of fighting, tired of always waiting for the next disaster. Marshal Brennan is offering us a chance at something stable, something legal. I think we should take it. Luke was quiet for a long moment, and Clara could see the war playing out behind his eyes, his instinct to resist authority warring with his love for her, his desire for principle fighting against the practical need for security. All right, he said finally. We'll do it. We'll be their heroes. But Clara, the moment they ask us to do something that compromises who we are, the moment they try to make us into something we're not, then we walk away, Clara finished, together, like we do everything else. They returned to the porch where Marshal Brennan was waiting. The woman's sharp eyes assessed them both, and Clara had the feeling she already knew what their answer would be. "We'll cooperate," Luke said, "but on our terms. We'll testify. We'll help expose corruption where we find it, but we won't be puppets. We tell the truth as we saw it, not some sanitized version that makes the governor look good." Brennan considered this, then nodded. "Fair enough. The truth is damning enough without embellishment anyway. Garrison's crimes speak for themselves." She pulled out papers from her saddlebag. "These are the corrected land deeds. I'll file them in Denver myself, make sure they're properly recorded this time. As far as the law is concerned, Lucas Carver legitimately purchased the Whitfield farm 6 years ago, with an agreement that included the eventual marriage to Clara Whitfield when she came of age. The exact lie I told Garrison," Luke said with a hint of dark humor. "The best lies are the ones close enough to truth that people want to believe them," Brennan said. She handed over another set of papers. "These are releases from your father's creditors. The territorial government has agreed to pay his legitimate debts from Garrison's seized assets. You're free and clear." Clara took the papers with shaking hands. Freedom. Real, legal, documented freedom. It felt too good to be true. But the papers were real, the seals authentic. "There's one more thing," Brennan said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Diego Valdez didn't work alone. He was part of a network of hired killers operating throughout the territories. We've been trying to break that network for years, but we've never had enough evidence. Those telegrams between Garrison and Valdez, they mention other names, other operators. We need you to help us identify them, connect the dots." "You want us to help you hunt down killers," Luke said. "I want you to help us stop them from killing more innocent people. There are other Claras out there, other towns being terrorized by men like Garrison who use men like Valdez to maintain their power. You've seen how it works. You've lived it. That knowledge is valuable." Luke looked at Clara, and she could see the question in his eyes. This was bigger than they'd anticipated, more dangerous. Helping the Marshals hunt down a killer network meant making enemies, powerful ones. But Clara thought about the women like her trapped in contracts they never agreed to, facing violence for refusing men who saw them as property. She thought about the Marcuses and the Amoses, good people killed for standing in the way of tyrants. If she and Luke could help stop that, even a little. "We'll help," Clara said before Luke could speak. "But we do it from here, our home. We're not leaving the farm to chase criminals across the territory. You bring us the information, we'll help you make sense of it. We'll testify when needed. But this farm, this life, it stays ours." Brennan smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "You're going to be good at this, Mrs. Carver, both of you. Most people who go through what you've experienced either break or become hard. But you found a way to turn trauma into purpose. That's rare." The Marshals stayed for another hour, going over details, establishing protocols for communication. They'd send information via telegraph to Clearwater using codes to prevent interception. Luke and Clara would analyze it, look for patterns, help identify targets for investigation. It was detective work more than gunfighting, which suited Clara fine. She'd had enough of violence. As the Marshals prepared to leave, Deputy Martinez approached Clara with an awkward expression. "Mrs. Carver, I wanted to say what you did standing up to Garrison like that, it matters. My sister, she's in a similar situation down in New Mexico, married to a man who beats her, but she's got no way out. When I go home, I'm going to tell her your story, show her that there's always a way to fight back." "Tell her to be smart," Clara said. "Tell her to plan, to get help if she can, and tell her that survival isn't weakness. Sometimes you have to survive long enough to find your moment to strike back." Martinez nodded, touched his hat, and mounted up. The Marshals rode out, leaving Luke and Clara standing in the yard of their farm, legally theirs now, documented and protected. "Are we doing the right thing?" Luke asked quietly as the dust from the horse's hooves settled. "I don't know," Clara admitted, "but we're doing something. We're not hiding. We're not running. We're building something. And if that something helps other people build their own freedom, maybe that's enough." That night, they celebrated their official ownership of the farm with a simple dinner and a bottle of wine Mrs. Patterson had sent as a wedding gift. The house was quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of night birds calling. Clara sat curled against Luke on the old sofa, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. I keep thinking about what that deputy said, Clara murmured. About his sister. How many women are out there right now trapped the way I was? Too many, Luke said. It's the way of the world, Clara. Men with power using it to control those without. It's been that way since the beginning of time. But it doesn't have to be. That's what we proved, isn't it? That even the most powerful tyrant can be brought down if someone's brave enough to stand against him. Luke pressed a kiss to her hair. Or foolish enough. I'm still not sure there's a difference. There is. Brave means you know the risks and choose to act anyway. Foolish means you don't understand what you're risking. Clara tilted her head to look up at him. You knew exactly what you were risking when you stepped between me and that whip. That makes you brave. And you knew exactly what Garrison would do when you cursed him in that church. That makes us both brave. Or both foolish. Maybe it runs in the family. Clara laughed, and it felt good, felt normal. This was what she'd been fighting for. Not just survival, but the chance to laugh, to love, to build something worth protecting. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Days were spent working the farm, preparing for winter, making repairs that would last. Evenings were spent poring over documents that arrived via telegraph from Marshal Brennan, coded messages about suspected criminals, patterns of violence, connections between corrupt officials across the territory. Luke proved to have a mind for investigation, able to see connections that others missed. Clara brought her own skills, attention to detail, careful documentation, and a memory that retained even casual mentions of names or places. Together, they helped the marshals build cases against 3 more men like Garrison, providing evidence that led to arrests and trials. But it was the letters that truly changed everything. It started with a single envelope, addressed to Clara in shaking handwriting. The return address was New Mexico territory, and when Clara opened it, she found a note from Deputy Martinez's sister. You don't know me, but your story saved my life. My brother told me what you did, how you stood up to a powerful man and won. It gave me courage to leave my husband, to take my children and run. We're safe now, staying with family. I wanted you to know that your bravery didn't just free you, it freed me too. Thank you. Maria Elena Martinez. Clara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Luke found her at the kitchen table, the letter clutched in her hands, crying so hard she couldn't speak. What is it? What's wrong? He asked, alarm in his voice. She handed him the letter and watched his face change as he read it. When he looked up, his eyes were suspiciously bright. We did that, Clara said, her voice thick. Our story helped her escape. 1 woman, 1 family, we helped save them without even knowing it. It's not us, Luke said gently. It's you, your courage, your refusal to submit. That's what inspired her. It's both of us. You gave me the chance to fight. Together, we created something that matters. More letters came after that. Women writing to thank Clara for showing them that resistance was possible. Men writing to Luke asking how he'd found the courage to stand against a tyrant. Families thanking them both for helping bring justice to the killers who terrorized their communities. Each letter was a reminder that their fight hadn't ended with Garrison's death. It had only begun. By winter, Clara and Luke had become unlikely celebrities in the territory. Newspapers ran stories about the bride who'd defied a tyrant and the cowboy who'd caught the whip. Dime novels began appearing with lurid titles like The Whipping Post Rescue and Love and Justice in Clearwater, most of which bore only passing resemblance to the truth. Luke hated the attention, hated being recognized when they went to town, hated the way people stared and whispered. But Clara watched him slowly adjust, watched him realize that their fame could be a tool, a way to shine light into dark corners where corruption festered. When Marshal Brennan asked them to testify before the territorial legislature about the need for stronger protections for women in contract law, Luke agreed without hesitation. They made the journey to Denver together, and Clara stood before a room full of politicians and told her story. Not the sanitized dime novel version, but the real one, with all its fear and pain and desperate courage. The law that passed 3 months later, the Clara Whitfield Act they called it, much to her embarrassment, required all marriage contracts to be reviewed by an independent judge, prohibited contracts made while either party was intoxicated or under duress, and established protections for women seeking to escape abusive marriages. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't save everyone, but it was something. and something was better than nothing. Spring came to the farm with an explosion of green, fields that had been barren under her father's neglect, now carefully planted with wheat and corn. Luke had proven to be a capable farmer, and together they'd built something that was starting to look like prosperity. The house had been repaired, the barn rebuilt, and they'd acquired 3 milk cows, a dozen chickens, and 2 horses beyond their riding mounts. It was on a warm April morning that Clara realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a week or two, but the confirmation from Doc Morrison made it real. She sat in his office, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, feeling the weight of this new reality settling over her. "About 3 months along, I'd say," Doc Morrison said kindly. "Everything looks healthy. You're young and strong, Clara. You should have no problems." But Clara knew about problems, knew that childbirth could kill, that infections could take both mother and child, that the frontier was littered with graves of women who'd died bringing life into the world. "Does Luke know?" Doc Morrison asked. "Not yet. I wanted to be sure first." Clara stood, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions: joy, fear, excitement, terror. "Doc, can I ask you something about my mother?" Morrison's expression softened. He'd been the one to treat her mother in those final days, had sat with Clara when the end came. "Of course." "Was she afraid? At the end?" "No," Morrison said quietly. "She was at peace. Her only fear was for you, for what would happen to you after she was gone. I think it would give her great joy to know you're safe now, building a life with a good man, about to start a family of your own." Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her mother should be here for this. Should be the one Clara told first, should be preparing to be a grandmother. But life didn't care about shoulds. It only cared about what was. She found Luke in the barn, repairing a stall door. He looked up when she entered, and something in her expression must have given her away because he immediately set down his tools. "What's wrong? What did Doc Morrison say?" "Nothing's wrong," Clara said, and realized it was true. Despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, nothing was wrong. Everything was exactly as it should be. "Luke, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." She watched the news hit him, watched shock and joy and terror play across his face in rapid succession. Then he was moving, closing the distance between them, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that made her want to cry. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Clara, I don't know how to be a father. What if I'm no good at it? What if you're exactly as good at it as you've been at everything else?" Clara interrupted. "What if you love our child the way you've loved me, completely, protectively, with everything you have?" Luke pulled back enough to cup her face in his hands. "I'm terrified." "So am I. But we'll figure it out together, the way we've figured out everything else." They stood there in the barn, holding each other, contemplating this new future that was rushing toward them: a child, a family. The continuation of everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built. "We need to be more careful," Luke said finally. "No more investigative work for Marshal Brennan. No more risks. Our child needs both parents alive and safe." Clara started to argue, then stopped. He was right. The work they'd been doing was important, but it was also dangerous. They'd been lucky so far, but luck ran out, and she couldn't risk her child losing a parent the way she'd lost hers. "We'll tell Brennan," she agreed. "We'll help with analysis, with testimony when it's safe. But no more field work, no more danger." Luke nodded, relief evident in his face. Then he smiled, and it was the first time Clara had seen him truly, completely happy. "We're going to be parents." "We are. Terrifying, isn't it?" "Absolutely." He kissed her softly. "Let's do it anyway." The baby came in late November, during the first big snowstorm of the year. Doc Morrison made it to the farm just in time, and Mrs. Patterson served as midwife, the same way she'd helped bring half of Clearwater's children into the world. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Clara thought she might not survive it, moments when the pain was so intense she couldn't remember why she'd wanted this. But then she heard the cry, thin and reedy at first, then stronger, and everything else fell away. Doc Morrison placed the baby in her arms, and Clara looked down at her daughter's face and felt the world shift on its axis. "She's perfect," Luke said, his voice thick with emotion. He was sitting beside the bed, one finger gently touching the baby's impossibly tiny hand. "Clara, she's absolutely perfect." "Eleanor," Clara said. The name had come to her weeks ago, sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "After my mother, Eleanor Grace Carver." Luke's eyes met hers, and she saw understanding there. Eleanor had been her mother's name, and Grace had been Luke's wife. By naming their daughter after both, they were honoring the people who'd shaped them, who'd brought them to this moment. "Eleanor Grace," Luke repeated. "It's perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect." He leaned down and kissed Clara's forehead. "Thank you. For this, for everything. For being brave enough to fight, to survive, to build this life with me." Clara wanted to respond, wanted to tell him all the things she felt, the love, the gratitude, the bone-deep satisfaction of having created something pure and good out of all the darkness they'd survived. But exhaustion was pulling at her, and she was so tired, so utterly spent. "Stay," she whispered, her eyes already closing. "Always," Luke promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Clara drifted off to sleep with her daughter in her arms and her husband at her side, and for the first time since she was a child herself, she felt completely safe. The years that followed were quieter than the ones that came before, though not without their challenges. Eleanor grew from a squalling infant into a fierce, curious child who had her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination. She learned to walk in the fields Clara and Luke had planted, learned to ride on the gentle mare they'd bought for that purpose, learned to read from the same books that lined Luke's shelves. Luke proved to be a devoted father, patient and gentle but firm when needed. Clara watched him teach their daughter to shoot, to ride, to stand up for herself, and she saw him healing with each lesson, each moment of connection. He was giving Eleanor the childhood he'd never had, the safety he'd never known. And in doing so, he was finally forgiving himself for the man he'd been before. Clara herself found purpose in ways she'd never expected. The letters kept coming, and she answered each one, offering advice, encouragement, sometimes practical help. When a woman in Utah Territory wrote saying she had no way to escape an abusive husband because she had no money and no skills, Clara sent her enough cash for a train ticket and the address of a boarding house in Denver where the owner would give her work and protection. When a girl in Wyoming wrote saying her father had promised her to a man 3 times her age, Clara contacted Marshall Brennan, who investigated and found that the promised marriage violated territorial law. The girl was freed, the father prosecuted, and another small victory was won. It became Clara's quiet mission, helping women escape the traps that had nearly destroyed her. Luke supported her completely, using his own investigative skills to verify stories, identify safe houses, track down resources. Together they created an informal network of protection, an underground railroad for women fleeing violence and coercion. They were careful. They used intermediaries, coded letters, trusted contacts. They never put Eleanor at risk, never brought danger to their doorstep. But they helped, and that helping became as much a part of their lives as farming or family dinners or watching the sunset from the porch. Eleanor was 5 when she asked the question Clara had been dreading. They were sitting together in the kitchen, Eleanor drawing while Clara made bread, when the little girl looked up with those serious green eyes. "Mama, why do people call you the whipping post bride?" Clara's hands stilled in the dough. She'd known this moment would come, had prepared for it, but it still hit hard. How did you explain to a child that her mother had nearly been destroyed before she ever existed? "That's a story from before you were born," Clara said carefully, "from when I met your father." "Tell me," Eleanor demanded with the imperious tone of a 5-year-old. So Clara told her, a simplified version, leaving out the worst of the violence, the deepest of the fears. She told her about Garrison, about the whipping post, about Luke stepping between her and harm. She told her about choosing to fight instead of submit, about finding courage in the darkest moment. Eleanor listened with wide eyes, and when the story was done, she said, "Papa is very brave." "He is," Clara agreed. "And you're brave too, Mama. You didn't let the bad man win." "No, I didn't." "And you know what I learned, Eleanor, the most important thing?" Eleanor shook her head. "That you always have a choice. Even when it seems like you don't. Even when powerful people try to take your choices away, you always have one. It might not be a good choice or an easy one, but it's yours. And no one, no matter how powerful, can take that from you unless you let them." Eleanor considered this seriously. I'll never let anyone take my choices, Mama. I promise. Clara pulled her daughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her small body. Good girl. And if anyone tries, you fight. And if you can't fight alone, you find help. You find your papa or me or someone you trust. You never have to face the monsters alone. Like Papa found you? Eleanor asked. Exactly like that. That night, Clara told Luke about the conversation, and he held her while she cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing that their daughter would grow up, understanding that she had value, that she had choices, that she could be both loved and free. We did it, Luke said quietly. We broke the cycle. Eleanor will never know what it's like to be trapped the way you were. No, Clara agreed. She won't. We made sure of that. They'd done more than that, actually. Over the years, they'd helped hundreds of women escape situations like Clara's. The network they'd built, working with Marshall Brennan and others like her, had become a lifeline for the desperate and trapped. They'd even influenced policy. The Clara Whitfield Act had been followed by other reforms, other protections, each one making it a little harder for men like Garrison to operate with impunity. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. There were still tyrants, still victims, still women tied to metaphorical whipping posts all across the frontier. But it was something. They'd made the world a little bit better, a little bit safer, and that counted for something. On the 10th anniversary of the day Luke had caught the whip, Clara stood in the town square of Clearwater with her family. The town had erected a monument, a simple stone column with names carved into it. Amos Brennan, Marcus Webb, Sarah Jennings, Tom Butterfield, all the people who'd died at Garrison's hands, officially remembered now, their deaths acknowledged as murders rather than accidents. At the base of the monument was a plaque that read, "In memory of those who died resisting tyranny and in honor of those who survived it. May we never forget that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it." Eleanor, now 10 years old and tall for her age, read the plaque aloud with perfect clarity. "Mama, is this about you and Papa?" "It's about everyone who's ever had to choose between submission and resistance," Clara said. "Everyone who chose to fight even when the odds were against them." Luke's arm was around her shoulders, solid and warm. They'd both changed in 10 years, grayer, more weathered, marked by time and hard work. But the bond between them had only strengthened, forged in fire and tempered by the life they'd built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Luke asked quietly, so only Clara could hear. "The way it all happened? The violence, the danger, the public nature of our lives?" Clara thought about it honestly. She thought about the whipping post and the terror of that day, about Garrison's death and Valdez falling in the street, about the nightmares that still sometimes woke her in the dead of night. She thought about the burden of being a symbol, of having strangers know her story, of the responsibility that came with being someone others looked to for hope. Then she looked at Eleanor, strong and confident and free. She looked at the monument and thought of all the women who'd written to thank her, all the lives that had been changed because she'd refused to submit. She looked at Luke and remembered the man who'd stepped between her and death without hesitation. "No," she said, "I don't regret any of it, because all of it, every terrible moment, every impossible choice, it led to this, to us, to the life we've built and the difference we've made. How could I regret that?" Luke kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Clara Carver. Have I mentioned that recently?" "Not in the last hour. Clearly you're slipping in your husbandly duties." "Well, we can't have that." He pulled her closer, and Clara leaned into him, watching as Eleanor ran off to join some other children playing near the monument. This was what she'd fought for, not just survival, but this, love and family, and the freedom to choose her own path. The whipping post was a decade in the past, but its lesson remained, that even in the darkest moment, even when tied and helpless, you still had a choice. You could submit or resist, break or bend, give up or fight on. Clara had chosen to fight, and Luke had chosen to stand with her, and together they'd built something that mattered. Not just a farm or a family, but a legacy of resistance, a proof that tyranny could be defeated, that love could be found in the most unlikely places, that courage could change the world. The sun was setting over Clearwater, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, and Clara stood with her husband and watched their daughter play, and knew that this moment, this life, this hard-won peace was worth every sacrifice, every risk, every moment of terror. She was free, truly, completely, irrevocably free. And she would make damn sure that her daughter, and every girl who came after, knew that same freedom. That was the promise she'd made at the whipping post, the vow she'd whispered when Luke had caught the Lash and claimed her as his own. And it was a promise she intended to keep,